happen here in the UK as we get into the late afternoon and the evening, as Hanukkah will be officially marked by the lighting of candles at various events in population centres and in homes right across the UK where there are Jewish communities, Jewish people in neighbourhoods. What we can tell you with regard to one of the suspects is that we can name him as 24-year-old Naveed Akram, an Australian of Pakistani origin. He is from Lahore in Pakistan. His driver's license was found at the location where he was shot by police officers responding to this incident on the bridge. You're looking at that little bridge there, the vantage point that they used to open fire on people at that Hanukkah celebration. Now, we don't know at this stage whether he is the gunman that was actually killed or the gunman that was critically injured. Either way, we confirm his name as 24-year-old Naveed Akram. At this hour, we still don't know anything about the second gunman. What we can tell you is that according to the Australian head of the intelligence services, Mike Burgess, one of the suspects was known to the security services. He stressed that their name was not connected with any imminent threat, but they were clearly on the security services radar. And as always with these incidents, we've seen it in the UK with 7/7, in the UK with the Westminster attack, London Bridge attack, the Manchester Arena attack. You got suspects that actually were on the security services radar as well. And in some cases, there were actions that perhaps could have been acted on, intelligence that wasn't acted on. The security services and the police will always say, you know, it's choices at the end of the day. They have to deal with a very significant threat level, with thousands of names of potentially extremist individuals, and all of that intelligence just has to be sifted through and prioritised. And sometimes they don't get it right. The vast majority of time, of course, they get it right, and we don't hear about that because it's a very successful work that the police and security services do. But now and again, even though there might be intelligence on individuals, they slip through the net and a horrific event like this takes place. Now, we're not saying that anybody has slipped through the net here. We just don't know if there was any specific intelligence out there. But to that end, sources have told us that the Israeli intelligence agency Mossad had contacted the Australian authorities, the aliens, to a growing threat against the Jewish community in Australia, a threat that Mossad had said was being coordinated, funded, encouraged by the Iranians. Now, we don't know how specific those warnings were and whether any of them were acted upon by the Australians, but clearly it's of real concern to hear that, and it comes against a backdrop of anti-Semitism in Australia reaching very worrying proportions. Out of the G7, the 7 nations around the world that have the highest Jewish communities, Australia is at the top of a very undesirable list in terms of the number of anti-Semitic incidents, even though the community in Australia is pretty small, 100,000 or so Jewish people that live in Australia. So a lot of concern about the growing threats there and around the world. Here as well in the UK, we saw that terrible attack that marked the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur that took place at the synagogue in Manchester, which an Islamist extremist, again citing support for the Gaza war, decided to launch a deadly rampage, a stabbing and vehicle attack on that synagogue. We've seen many other incidents targeting Jewish people, the Jewish community, synagogues and alike right around the world. And again, to that end, we're hearing from the Metropolitan Police today that they are stepping up the security that they will provide as we go into the evening hours tonight and the start of those Hanukkah celebrations here. They're providing extra security. We can read you actually a statement from Scotland Yard saying the thoughts of all of us at the Metropolitan Police are with the loved ones of those who've been killed or injured in the terrible attack in Sydney earlier today, and with the emergency services who responded. It goes on to say that while the details of the incident continue to emerge, the Australian authorities have now confirmed that the target was a Hanukkah gathering taking place on Bondi Beach. It is, the Scotland Yard statement says, an awful reality that Jewish communities across the world continue to face a higher level of threat at a time when London's Jewish communities are continuing to come together to begin the celebrations of Hanukkah. We know this attack will be the cause of not just terrible upset, but also significant heightened concern about safety. We are or were already working closely with partners, including the Community Service Trust. That's the group of volunteers that work to secure Jewish places of interest right across the UK, working with the CST to provide an increased presence around synagogues and other community venues at this important time. Now, the Scotland Yard statement concludes by saying, while there is no information to suggest any link between the attack in Sydney and the threat level in London, this morning we are stepping up our police presence, carrying out additional community patrols and engaging with the Jewish community to understand what more we can do in the coming hours and days. Now, listen, of course, it's not just the threat that is out there to the Jewish community. We are now into the festive period in the UK and in other Western nations and Christian nations to celebrate the Christmas festival, and that is, as always, a time of heightened concern for potential terrorist attack. And the authorities, because we've had briefings about this in recent weeks, have told us that they are particularly concerned during this time period at the moment because of what has been playing out in the Middle East, in particular in Gaza. They're about the potential for terrorist-related activity over that festive period. To that end, we got news just today of a plot that was foiled by the German authorities in southern Bavaria, a plot to target a Christmas market. We've seen Christmas markets targeted so often in the past. So that particular plot has been foiled. 5 people are in custody. There is no specific terrorist threat information out there that we can bring you that the police and security services here are concerned about, but just generally they are warning people to be extra vigilant at this time of year. You are continuing to watch and listen to GBNews' ongoing coverage of the terrible events at Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia. It's now 11 minutes past 2 in the morning. Most people in Australia who are not working on the likes of this terrorist investigation off to bed now and about to begin their working week tomorrow. But here, of course, in London, we continue to bring you the very latest developments as they continue to come into us. And you're looking at images now of the scene. I'd like to bring, if we can, use some of the images of a very brave individual earlier who tackled one of the gunmen. I'm not sure if we got that image ready, but even if we don't, I can tell you about him anyway, because it was... Here he is. This is 24... the 43-year-old, I should say, Ahmed Al-Ahmed, a local shopkeeper from a fruit and vegetable store in the Sydney area, who just had no regard, it seems, for his own safety, as he went up and attacked and subdued that gunman, managed to wrestle the pump-action shotgun from his clutches. That gunman, by the way, we don't know who he is. He's not 24-year-old Naveed Akram. He is the other one, as yet unidentified. But Ahmed Al-Ahmed, the shopkeeper, we're told, was injured. One of the 29 people injured in this shooting attack. He suffered injuries, gunshot wounds to the shoulder and leg, one of those in a serious condition in area hospitals throughout Sydney today. We certainly wish him the very best for the most amazing act of heroism. As to say, you're watching and listening to GB News's continuing coverage, and we're joined now by Nana Akua to take you through the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, Mark White. And if you just tuned in, welcome on board. It is just coming up to 14 minutes after 3 o'clock. Now, just to recap, if you are joining us now, at least 12 people have been killed following a mass shooting by 2 gunmen at Bondi Beach in Sydney, with 29 currently in hospital. Now, one of the gunmen is among the dead. Footage from the scene shows a man wresting a pump-action shotgun from a gunman. Now, the attack happened as people celebrated the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. In a press conference, the New South Wales Police Premier Chris Minnis said that one of the gunmen had been killed and another one was in custody.
2 individuals began firing on a crowded group of families on Bondi Beach at Archer Park. This cowardly act of terrifying violence is shocking and painful to see and represents some of our worst fears about terrorism in Sydney. I very sadly need to report that as of now, there are at least 12 individuals that have been killed. One of the offenders has also been killed and one is in custody. This attack was designed to target Sydney's Jewish community on the first day of Hanukkah.
Australian police say that they are currently investigating if there is a third offender. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says that the evil that was unleashed at Bondi Beach today is beyond comprehension.
This afternoon, there has been a devastating terrorist incident at Bondi at the Hanukkah by the Sea celebration. This is a targeted attack on Jewish Australians on the first day of Hanukkah, which should be a day of joy, a celebration of faith. An act of evil anti-Semitism, terrorism that has struck the heart of our nation. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian, and every Australian tonight will be, like me, devastated.
Well, more than 50 gunshots were heard as hundreds of people fled the scene in Sydney at around about 6:40 p.m. That's local time.
I ran onto the beach. I guess everyone ran onto the beach. It was pretty terrifying. And yeah, I eventually went back to see what was happening. A few people helped a few old people get up and get out of there, but it was like there were lots of bodies on the floor.
Absolutely terrifying. Now, there have been plenty of reaction here in the UK, with the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, saying it is deeply distressing news and described it as an appalling attack. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has announced that extra officers from the Metropolitan Police will be on the streets of London following the attack. He said, "My thoughts and condolences, along with the rest of London, are with everyone affected by the horrific attack at Bondi Beach, Australia today." Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has reacted to the tragic events in Australia, saying the Hanukkah party shooting in Australia is horrendous. The threat is everywhere.
Genuinely horrendous. Last I hear, it's 10 dead and many, many wounded. I did see some video of an heroic Australian, taking the gun out of the hands of one of these terrorists. Desperately sorry for the Jewish community in Sydney, which is quite considerable. But equally, you realise actually the threat to the Jewish people is everywhere. It's not just in Manchester or in parts of North London, it's all over the world. And there is this real poison.
The Director of Public Affairs at the Jewish Leadership Council, Russell Langer, joins me now. Russell, welcome to the programme. Russell, let's talk about what's happening, because to me it seems absolutely abhorrent that Jewish people, in my view, have been allowed to be castigated, vilified across the world in many countries without... It seems as though anti-Semitism has almost been normalised.
Hi, good afternoon. It is abhorrent. It's an international issue. So that this attack happened in Australia. It's the other side of the world, but for the British Jewish community, it might as well be next door down the road. We will know people who were there, who were on the beach at the time. I didn't think I knew anybody, but then later found out through family WhatsApp groups that I had distant family members there. We're a small, close-knit community, but around the world there are those motivated by this evil who see Jews celebrating and want to kill them. And that's happened in Australia today. It happened 2 months ago in Manchester on a different Jewish festival. And it happened in Israel on October 7th on a different Jewish festival. Our Jewish festivals are a time for the Jewish community to come together, celebrate, mark them in the appropriate way. For some people, as we can see, there are those who just want to come out and kill us.
It just, to me, I didn't realise it, but to the Jewish community, it is perfectly normal for you to have guards outside synagogues, children being walked to school by other people, so they're protecting them. To me, I wasn't aware of all of that, but it seems to me that the Jewish people have been tolerating a lot of hate for a very long time.
That's exactly it. It's so normalised that a lot of the time we forget that other people don't understand that. I grew up in this country, going to school in this country, behind high fences and security. If you go to any Jewish communal location, you will find that, including our places of worship. But it's also important to note, because this was a Hanukkah event on Bondi Beach, what sort of makes Hanukkah different in that sense. Hanukkah is the time of year where we come out of our places of worship and our homes. We don't celebrate it behind those fences. It's the festival of light. The whole purpose is to share that, and we celebrate that with communal gatherings in major locations in city centres and on local high streets. That's what the people of were doing on Bondi Beach when they were attacked. But that's also what's going to be happening across the UK and elsewhere in the world over the next 8 nights. And once again, we have just seen, we always take that threat seriously. We always have to consider the security for gatherings like that. And once again, we've been reminded why.
How do you feel when you hear London Mayor Sadiq Khan saying that he's putting extra officers on to protect Jewish people, and he says his thoughts and condolences, along with the rest of London, are with everyone affected by the horrific attack at Bondi Beach, Australia today? He said that, but then we've had week after week after week after week of pro-Palestine protests in the UK, with people holding placards saying, all sorts of anti-Semitic tropes, and not much has been done about it.
I was in Manchester the day after the Heaton Park attack 2 months ago, which occurred on Yom Kippur, and I just felt this visceral anger from the Jewish community there. We saw that at the vigil, and we saw how that was expressed towards British politicians. But that anger just comes from, as you said, that generations of this normalization of being used to being behind security and this feeling that these attacks are just a matter of time. We're just waiting for the one that's going to be successful. And we saw that in Manchester. We've seen it around the world, in the USA and today in Australia. But I think what angers people the most is, I think we're done with security. That security is important. We need that police presence because we've seen what that threat is, and that threat is real. But we're done with this idea that this is a problem that could be sorted with some extra policing and some extra security. We have deep underlying issues, which is why events happening elsewhere lead to people wanting to perpetrate violence in our communities. And that's not enough. Yes, we need police. Yes, we need security. But ultimately, what is being done to make sure that we don't need that security?
What do you think needs to happen then? Because security is a sort of, it's a reactive measure. It's not a proactive measure, really. So what do you need the governments to be doing to we need to wipe all of this sort of hatred out? How do you think they could go about that?
We do. I think that starts with understanding where that hatred comes from. Anti-Semitism is prevalent in many forms of extremism. The attack that happened in the UK most recently was an Islamist attack. I'm not aware of the police in Australia having ascribed any particular motives, but we've seen Islamist attacks around the world. We've seen far-right attacks in America. There is no shortage of groups and extremist ideologies who are out there wanting to see dead Jews and wanting to see other people who value Western liberal values be killed. And we need to look at what those forms of extremism are, not be squeamish about talking about each of those forms and what needs to be done, and looking at how we as a country react to the fact that our communities are being divided by events that are happening elsewhere. This isn't an international issue. This is a British issue, and we need to remember that.
I do find it shocking, really, the levels of racism that are put towards the Jewish community, because as a black female, I don't experience this level of racism ever. And most of my family, we don't have to have security when we go to schools or anything like that. And I'm just kind of appalled that it has been allowed to get to this level, and the Jewish people have been quiet about it, because you actually have been very calm about it and just gone about your business, looking after yourselves and your families without making a big deal out of it. I think you are right now to demand that the government do something. But in terms of what specifically they could do to kind of wipe it out, what would you like to see happen?
Well, you're absolutely right. I would say I think the community has been quiet about it for quite a long time because it's been so normalised. And the Manchester attack specifically was a real wake-up call to our community that this isn't normal. This isn't a normal way of living, and more needs to be done. We've worked really hard with government because ultimately anti-Semitism is so prevalent across society. There aren't easy answers on how to fix this. There's no easy way. I think the government needs to start with a proper extremism strategy, and that's been missing. We need to look at how this is pervasive in our schools. If we look back at the Manchester attack, this was somebody who may have been born elsewhere but lived here from a very young age and went through a British education system, and that obviously has failed in this instant. And we're well aware of anti-Semitism in schools. We need to look at workplaces, including in the public sector, the horrific stuff that we're seeing in the NHS. And ultimately, when we see this low-level stuff being tolerated and people seeing this as a green light that they can get away with it, that just escalates into people taking things further until ultimately people are emboldened to go and take violent action. I keep talking about the Manchester attack because that's the one that was successful in killing Jews in this country. But we've seen failed plots. We've seen plots which have been foiled by the UK authorities, which thankfully we're not here discussing because they didn't succeed. But it's just, we've seen the one succeed, but there's going to be more. There's going to be others trying, and more needs to be done across the board. Now,
I know that, obviously, the BBC have been held up for a lot of the things that their coverage being anti-Israel, which some people will then view that as anti-Semitic. And you've had, when they had the Glastonbury coverage, they had Bob Villan shouting death to the IDF. Now, I'm sure he would argue that he's not being anti-Semitic and specifically targeting the IDF as an Israeli force. But it does seem that a lot of these organisations and these so-called people that are meant to talk about all the things that are going on in the world have almost made things worse. They've almost, it feels like they've inadvertently kind of gone along with all of this and put more power into it. I'm just, you know, I'm kind of trying to work out how we fix this. Do you think that all of this is also part of the multiculturalism in this country as well? Do you think multiculturalism has kind of gone wrong, really, and isn't working, and it is partly to blame?
So on your first point, in terms of the language, that I think, you know, you made several examples there. We have seen, be it politicians, be it celebrities, artists, other forms, tripping over themselves to try to use ever more extreme rhetoric without any concern as to what the consequences are. You know, people playing politics about a conflict happening elsewhere with absolutely zero regard to the devastating impact that it's having in this country. And look, ultimately, more needs to be done. I don't think community cohesion is working in this country. Too many times, interfaith projects have been completely disrupted by extremists who reject any idea of interaction between Muslim groups who want to work with the Jewish community, especially at times like this, to show solidarity, and unfortunately are scuppered in doing that by extremists within their own community. You know, these are real issues. I think, unfortunately, it's been too easy to sweep them under the carpet and ignore that they've been happening, but more and more evidence just shows that that's just not a solution.
All right, Russell Langer, thank you very much. Really good to talk to you. He's the Director of Public Affairs at the Jewish Leadership Council. Well, 28 minutes after 3 o'clock, I'm going to welcome on board my panel, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly, and also political commentator Andy Williams. Danny, I'm going to start with you. Awful events that happened in Australia. It seems that there are these splinter groups or networks or people who want to castigate Jewish people. Do you think that the behaviour of some of, you know, some of the so-called good lefties and people like that have actually contributed to this hate?
I think what they've contributed to is a whipping up of anger that some unhinged lunatics can perpetuate incredible violence. They would argue that they're angry because of the, and I'll put this in inverted commas, the genocide that is being committed in Palestine. I often wonder about people's responsibility, particularly high-profile people. I think they should rein some of their comments in, because we are dealing, although they have a legitimate, and I understand completely why they are protesting against the Israeli government. I get that. But I think sometimes people need to rein in some of
the language.
Some of the language, because they're very responsible. You know, they're never prepared to balance things, in my opinion. And it was really interesting listening to Russell, because I remember as a much younger reporter for the BBC covering a story. Now, it's been known to me that synagogues have had guards and security for years. Jewish schools have had guards and security for years. I remember covering a story, and there was a care home in Birmingham that looked after old Jews, and they had security. And this was mind-blowing to me. I couldn't understand why you would need a team of security guards actually at the edge of the boundary of the property with walkie-talkies. So this is nothing new. And people need to understand, I mean, I recognise this 25 years ago.
But this is the point I was making, that we have literally normalised anti-Semitism. And did you not feel that's how it's become? And I'm new to this. I didn't realise that Jewish people had to have so much protection and security. I mean, there's been racism ever since I was born in this country towards people of colour. But I've not had to have security or somebody walking me to school or having protection if I'm at a place of worship or anything like that.
I do think that for some reason when people use inappropriate language about Jewish people, when people make sweeping statements about the Jewish community, it's not treated with the same seriousness as it is with other races, people of other backgrounds, of Muslims, of black people, any other group. And unfortunately, as we all know, anti-Semitism is as old as the hills. It's a scourge, it's a cancer, it needs to be eradicated. And I don't know whether there are more anti-Semitic people now or whether there is a greater feeling of anti-Semitism, but these attacks are becoming more common. We know that in the UK, there are an increasing number of attacks, more people being assaulted on the street. We had that horrific Manchester attack that Russell was talking about. And I mean, I feel it personally. My wife is Jewish. 3 weeks today, we are boarding a flight to Sydney. And when I saw this morning, I was absolutely horrified, devastated for that community. And, we come on here sometimes and have a knockabout about party politics and we can get riled up, but this is bigger than all of that. This is something we can all unite around, which is that anti-Semitism is a terrible thing. We have to call it out wherever we see it, because what might be a joke or an insult here or there on Twitter or wherever in the playground has real-world consequences, and we've seen those today.
Do you think that part of the problem is our open borders policy in many respects, because we're importing foreign arguments, foreign wars? Do you think that's part of it? Some people might look at it and say that.
Yeah, they might do. I don't agree with that. I think, unfortunately, there will always be... these people who committed this crime today, it looks as though they were Muslims, and it looks as though this was an Islamist attack. This isn't about religion. This is about people who are ill. It's an illness to firstly believe that Jewish people deserve to be murdered and then to go out and actually do it. So I don't think we should be talking about migration or border policy, and I'm sure there will be a huge debate about that. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is we need to, I think your previous guest made a really important point about education. We need to be really, really clear with people in schools from the earliest possible age. They need to understand that anti-Semitism is something that has existed for a long time. They need to understand the history. There's a reason we teach about the horrors of World War II in schools, and that's because people need to know about the Holocaust. They need to know how far this can go if it's unchecked.
What do you think, Danny, on that same question, whether we have imported foreign conflicts and because we've got a large Muslim population in the UK. Now, I'm not saying Muslim people are bad or anything like that. I'm only relating it in terms of the fact that this is often, in this particular attack, we think, we don't have the full details yet, but we think it was a terror attack and that it's an Islamist attack. What do you think? Do you think that we need to...
I think there is a problem within the Muslim community, and I think there's a proportionality about these wicked crimes. And I think, I hear what you say about mental illness, Andy. I think if anyone, the ultimate test of being brainwashed is if you are prepared to blow yourself up in order to kill, if you like, Christians at an Ariana Grande concert. Or in this case, these two lads, or three lads, they wanted to go out and be killed by police because that was their way. And this is the lunacy of it all. This is their way of guaranteeing their way to paradise to spend the rest of eternity with 72
we don't know what their reasoning is.
But that is why they would blow themselves up, Nana.
Yeah,
and that is the literal translation of certain aspects of the Quran. So if you have, a proportion of people of the Islamic faith who genuinely believe that, then that is where the problem is.
But Nana, to take your point, your question, are we importing this? Is this something to do with migration? Actually, if you look at the people who are out on the... And by the way, I think it's really important that when we're talking about the pro-Palestine marches in London, some of those people are carrying horrific placards. They are anti-Semitic, but others are people who... You may disagree, you may agree, just have pro-Palestinian views. We have to separate those.
You're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
I agree with that.
You affiliate yourself with something that is anti-Semitic, even if you're not doing that, you can't then say, oh, well, it's nothing to do with me, Gov.
I agree.
No, you're in there, you're in that space, and you know what it's about. So.
I agree, and that's why I think banning Palestine Action, for example, was absolutely the right thing to do. My point was that if you look at the people on those protests, many, many, many of them are white middle-class people who are hard left-wingers who are they just adopt you know, whatever the hard left say, they just adopt the policy, they adopt the idea, they jump on the bandwagon. And so are we importing it? Well, actually, a lot of the people who hold these disgusting views are white middle-class people.
Well, but do they carry out the terror attacks, though?
Well, disproportionately not.
Well, they don't.
No. They don't tend to.
Not even a single attack, never mind disproportionately.
But to what you said previously and to what our commentators have been saying, is that if you create this narrative and you have a lot of people talking in this way and vilifying Jewish people and doing all these marches and stuff like that where they're being anti-Semitic, not all of them obviously, then you create a narrative where you may help to exacerbate the situation.
Yeah, you're going to make angry people.
You could get somebody who's a nutter, as you said earlier, go and try and commit something. Now, I'm not saying excusing the nutter for carrying out that thing.
Of course you're not, no.
But I'm agreeing with your point.
You're making angry people angrier.
And this is where you say that maybe the white middle-class people joining these protests are not actually perpetrating any of this, but part of their behaviour has contributed potentially to somebody behaving like that. I think if that person is responsible for their own actions.
I think if you had someone from MI5 in the studio and they were to be candid and frank with you, there would be... I go back to my comment earlier about proportionality. Unfortunately, there's a small percentage of people who are literalists when it comes to translating the Quran, OK? And there are scripts in that legitimise...
Really?
Of course. That would legitimise what these two loonies have done today.
But you could say that about any religion. Any extremist will take a religious text, whether it's Islam, whether it's Christianity. Any extremist can take that and turn it into something insane. So it's not about the religion, it's about the people.
When was the last attack perpetuated by a Christian who used the New or the Old Testament to legitimise it?
Well, there was one in the 90s in America. I can't remember quite where it was.
30
yeah, but they happen is the point. They do happen. But are they less frequent? Yes, absolutely they are. And I'm not saying there is not a problem with Islamist fundamentalism. Of course there is, because we see these attacks happening routinely. But my point is we just have to be really careful to make it clear, and I'm not saying you're not saying this, we need to be clear that for the vast, vast, vast majority of people who follow Islam, they would never, ever consider anything like that.
Well, this is 47.4 in the Quran. I'm reading it from IslamicStudies.info, and it says that 47.4 says, when you meet the unbelievers in battle, smite their necks until you have crushed them, then bind your captives firmly. Thereafter, you are entitled to set them free, either by an act of grace or against random, until the war ends. That is for you to do. So I suppose it's saying capture them, but then potentially let them go. I think people will... It's kind of... They interpret things. It's the interpretation.
This is of course it is. This is the... And I'm going to use the word brainwashing, indoctrination, but this exemplifies... And it is, Andy's right, and I hope I didn't give the impression that I said all or most.
No.
I certainly didn't. It's just a proportionality. Go back to that word, it's quite significant. A tiny minority of these nut jobs go on to commit these crimes. And if you had someone from the government here, they would tell you they've probably got thousands of, mostly men, but thousands of people probably on a watch list. In fact, we can all agree on that. I don't know of any Christian fundamentalists who are on watch lists, Andy. Well, maybe a few.
We don't know.
We don't know, but what we do know is the thousands that are.
Well, look, you know, my view on this is that really and truly the perpetrators of these sort of attacks have themselves to blame. Whatever interpretation they've taken from whatever book, you cannot blame the book itself, because it's for those who will interpret it literally and behave in a manner that is totally unacceptable.
The Old Testament's full of this stuff.
Yes,
the sort of stuff you just read out. The Old Testament.
Stoning people to death, all of that kind of stuff, exactly.
But I don't know when the last time it was enacted upon.
I don't know. Look, all I think to this is that there is a conversation now to be had about how we move forward and how we stop this kind of behaviour perpetuating, and how we tackle anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim hate, and all those things, because actually one riles the other, doesn't it? So if you've got lots of anti-Semitism, you could end up then with the reverse of anti-Muslim hate.
Yes.
And so then these things feed off each other. So we have to find a way.
I've been listening to a really interesting podcast called Aftershock, right? And it's a London Review of Books podcast about the aftermath of 9/11, and specifically about how the war on terror spiralled out of control. And if you remember, immediately after 9/11, George W. Bush granted himself the most enormous, wide-ranging powers to, to do whatever it took on the war on terror. And there was one Democrat senator who stood up and objected to these powers being given, and she said, let's step back for a moment and pause today just for a minute so that we make sure this doesn't spiral out of control. And I think it is really important to step back when you see horrific events like this happening and not start passing any kind of draconian laws, overreacting. It's horrific, it's terrible, we all agree on that, but we have to, your word proportionality I think is absolutely right. So we have to call out anti-Semitism for what it is and guard against any sense that this could turn into, we could have a bandwagon of anti-Muslim hate developing off the back of this, because we don't need that either.
No, we don't need any form of hate at all. Yeah. Well, if you've just tuned in, of course, we've been talking about that horrendous news in Australia where 12 people have been injured, 11 people have been killed. Around about 6:40 local time in Sydney on Bondi Beach. More than 50 gunshots were heard. Hundreds of people fled the scene. Lots of politicians have spoken out about their thoughts and fears on it and why, of course, this has happened. We'll bring you all of the details. But just to recap, 12 people have been killed. It's a mass shooting, 2 gunmen on Bondi Beach in Sydney. 29 people are currently in hospital. One of the gunmen is among the dead. And footage from the scene shows a man wresting a pump-action shotgun from a gunman. The attack happened as people celebrated the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. In a press conference, the New South Wales Police Premier Chris Minns said that one of the gunmen had been killed and another one was in custody. So we'll keep bringing you all of that information as and when it happens. And do stay with us here on GBNews 43 minutes after 3 o'clock. I'm Nana Akua. Also joining me in the studio, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly and political commentator Andy Williams. And now also joining me in the studio, the chairman of the advisory board for the National Jewish Assembly, Gary Mond. Gary Mond, could I get your reaction to what happened?
My first reaction is to offer my condolences on behalf of the National Jewish Assembly to the families of all those who have tragically lost their lives and to wish those who have been injured a speedy recovery. My condemnation, however, goes to the government of Anthony Albanese in Australia, whose treatment of his Jewish communities in recent years has been abominable. We have seen similar situations in Australia as to the UK with regard to how Jews are being discriminated against in schools, in hospitals, in places of higher education, in the workplace, in the worlds of entertainment and sport, and elsewhere. It is no surprise as to what has happened. It's been coming for a long time. And God forbid the same thing would happen in this country. But all the warning signs are there. Similar to Australia, the warning signs are here in the UK. We also saw Albanese and Starmer, both of them recognise a terrorist state. They recognise a state of Palestine run by Hamas, without even, in some cases, even talking about the situation with the hostages who were held captive at that time. All the trends are moving in the direction of Jew hatred, and these are just examples, and the tragic consequences were seen today.
You know, Gary, again, all our condolences go out to those who've been affected by this awful, awful tragedy. In your view, you feel that this was obvious that something like this would happen. As I said earlier, wasn't aware of how much the Jewish people have been protecting each other from this level of anti-Semitism, and subsequent governments don't appear to have made any concessions or anything to help Jewish people.
Not only concessions to make the situation worse. Actually, there's an interface between another political issue, that of illegal immigration.
Well, that's, I pointed... See, I thought that this... I did mention it earlier, that was there any correlation to that and anti-Jewish hate, in your view?
In my view, well, we've had an example earlier this year of the case of Abu Wadi, who you might remember was the illegal immigrant who was arrested and found to have vast amounts of anti-Semitic material on him, calling for the Jews to be killed. Does that sort of thing give any comfort to the Jewish community? It's quite the opposite. It creates an even higher level of fear in the Jewish community than what we've been seeing already. And, of course, when we've got these calls for globalise the Intifada, they should be made illegal. Those calls should be made illegal. And I fear that there is actually no willpower on the part of the British government, just as with the Australian government, to really do anything about it. Lovely words, yes, but what actions are we seeing from Keir Starmer and his government? The precisely nothing.
Now, Andy pointed out earlier that some of those pro-Palestine protests, and we had them repeatedly week in, week out, a lot of the people in those protests appeared to be many white middle-class people who were holding the placards saying all sorts of nonsense from the river to the sea. But then if you ask them questions about which river or which sea, they didn't have a clue.
What actually that is there's a horrendous alliance between two Jew-hating groups. On the one hand, we have the fundamentalist Islamists, and I must say I'm focusing on Islamists and not ordinary Muslims, many of whom have perfectly legitimate views. We're focusing on the Islamists. That's one group. The other group is the far left. The far left, who have never liked the Jewish community because of the degrees of, they regard them as capitalist and successful. And we've got this interface of these two groups that has led, is at the background, is actually the cause of much of the anti-Semitism we see in Britain today, and indeed around the world. And what is interesting also, we saw this morning, was the attitude of the Israeli government. Netanyahu said essentially there is that Albanese has to bear responsibility for what's been happening. And the same comments are made by the Israeli opposition, who don't like Netanyahu. They're saying the same thing. We're actually witnessing a certain degree of unification among the Jewish community, which is quite rare, actually, on this particular issue of anti-Semitism.
And why do you blame the Australian government so much? What is it that they've specifically done to the Jewish community?
It's what they haven't done.
Which is what? What haven't they done?
They have not outlawed calls like globalised the Intifada. They have not done anything to address the issues in all sorts of public workplaces regarding Jew hatred. They have not made certain types of behaviour illegal. It's the same, it's very, very similar to the situation in the UK.
Do you get worried? So if you needed medical treatment or anything, do you get worried? And what are others in your community saying?
Many in our community are very, very worried. Quite a number are immigrating. One colleague said to me recently, the figures haven't yet shown up just how many Jews are immigrating. But in the next few months, there will be statistics coming out which will show the case that a large number of Jews have left the UK for a number of different destinations.
And do you think there are... Where do you think is the safest place for Jewish people? Because it seems all over the world we have this odd sort of far-left collaboration with far extremists. Where are the Jewish people safe? Because it feels...
Different Jews will have different views on this. I'll give you my view. Okay. My view is probably Israel. Other people are saying, quite strangely, Eastern Europe. Hungary, which hasn't let so many illegal immigrants in, if hardly any, where there's far less of a problem with militant Islam. Even Poland, even Slovakia, even a number of Eastern European countries are pointed as being, very strangely, because after the tragedies that happened during the Holocaust in those areas, these countries are actually perceived in a favourable light. I've even had one or two people say to me, Russia. The United States, of course, is one potential haven of safety, at least under Donald Trump it is. Who knows what will be, particularly if you're in New York City, under this new revolutionary Mandani leader who believes in globalising the Intifada. It could be a problem in New York, but different Jews have different views on that one. I'll just give you mine.
And what does... Because I think a lot of people have lots of different definitions for... What does globalise the Intifada actually mean when people...
Kill Jews.
That's it?
Yep.
Is there another interpretation of it?
No, not in my view.
Means uprising. That's my view on
because
that word.
Of what to who?
Well, no, I'm just giving you a definition. I'm not giving you an opinion. No. But apparently it means an uprising. So globalise the uprising.
And the uprising, and to do that means kill Jews.
Because
if you accept what you're saying is right, the conclusion of that is to kill Jews. You globalise the uprising by killing Jews.
And what about people arguing from the river to the sea there is a more passive meaning and it's not... it's not saying... But we do hear this, don't we? So we hear people justifying...
Well, let's see what river they're
to...
talking about. Firstly, we talk about the River Jordan. What sea are we talking about? We talk about the Mediterranean. That means to say you do not wish to see a state of Israel exist in any form whatsoever, if you believe it should be from the river to the sea. Also, you're referring to Palestine. What actually is Palestine? They mean Palestine as an Arab state. Before 1948, most of the world regarding Palestine as a Jewish state, actually. If you looked at the press in 1947, 1948, every reference to Palestine meant reference to its Jewish population, which was dominant in those days.
I find the whole thing very, very complicated. Do you find it complicated listening to, because some people say that, oh, well, the Jewish people were there first, other people say the Palestinian people were in Gaza first, some people say this is part of this, and I listen to it all and I think, I just wish everyone would just
There are
make
some
friends.
complications, but I actually, and yes, I would agree with that point. I'd like everyone to make friends. But essentially there is a strain of thought within the Islamic world that believes that Israel should not exist, and that is at the very core of all the problems, of everything. If we said to them, let's get rid of Israel, but we won't have an independent Palestinian state, we'll just divide it up between Egypt and Jordan, they'd say that's fine. The whole idea of the Palestinian state is being used as an excuse to get rid of Israel. Nothing else for it.
And of course, this is, as we understand it, we actually have some breaking news, by the way. I'll bring you, wait right there, Gary, but I'm going to bring you up to date now on the devastating attack on Bondi Beach, where at least 12 people have been killed following a mass shooting by 2 gunmen at Bondi Beach in Sydney. 29 people are currently in hospital. Footage from the scene shows a man wresting a pump-action shotgun from a gunman. The attack happened as people celebrated the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. And in a press conference, the New South Wales Police Premier Chris Minns said that one of the gunmen has been killed and another one is in custody.
2 individuals began firing on a crowded group of families on Bondi Beach at Archer Park. This cowardly act of terrifying violence is shocking and painful to see and represents some of our worst fears about terrorism in Sydney. I very sadly need to report that as of now, there are at least 12 individuals that have been killed. One of the offenders has also been killed and one is in custody. This attack was designed to target Sydney's Jewish community on the first day of Hanukkah.
Australian police say they are currently investigating if there is a third offender. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says that the evil that was unleashed on Bondi Beach today is beyond comprehension.
This afternoon there has been a devastating terrorist incident at Bondi at the Hanukkah by the Sea celebration. This is a targeted attack on Jewish Australians on the first day of Hanukkah, which should be a day of joy, a celebration of faith. An act of evil anti-Semitism, terrorism that has struck the heart of our nation. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian, and every Australian tonight will be, like me, devastated.
Well, more than 50 gunshots were heard as hundreds of people fled the scene in Sydney at around 6:40 p.m. local time.
Ran onto the beach. I guess everyone ran onto the beach. It was pretty terrifying. And yeah, I eventually went back to see what was happening. A few people helped a few old people get up and get out of there, but it was like there were lots of bodies on the floor.
And there's been plenty of reaction here in the UK, with the Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer saying it is deeply distressing news and described it as an appalling attack. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has announced that extra officers from the Metropolitan Police will be on the streets of London following it. And Reform UK leader Nigel Farage had this to say.
Genuinely horrendous. Last I hear, it's 10 dead and many, many wounded. I did see some video of an heroic Australian, taking the gun out of the hands of one of these terrorists. Desperately sorry for the Jewish community in Sydney, which is quite considerable. But equally, you realise actually the threat to the Jewish people is everywhere. It's not just in Manchester or in parts of North London, it's all over the world. And there is this real poison.
Nigel Farage earlier. And now some breaking news. We can now tell you that British-born rabbi was among at least 12 killed in the gun attack on Bondi Beach. So at least 12 people, including a British-born rabbi, have died and 29 were injured when 2 terrorist gunmen targeted a Jewish celebration at Bondi Beach in Sydney, Australia. Police have said the gunmen, armed with what police have described as long guns, opened fire on the Archer Park area of the popular beach at 6:47 p.m. local time on Sunday, New South Wales Police said. Well, joining me now, broadcaster and journalist Danny Kelly and political commentator Andy Williams. Also in the studio is Gary Mond. Gary, just to get your reaction to this awful update on the breaking story.
Well, obviously, I'm horrified to hear the British-born rabbi has been killed. I just wanted to also add that what is happening is it begins with verbal abuse. It goes on to graffiti. It goes on to arson. It goes on to physical violence. It goes on to murder. It goes on to mass murder. And ultimately, it goes on to pogroms. And there is nothing happening in this country that is stopping that dreadful chain of events, just as there was nothing happening in Australia that's stopping that dreadful chain of events.
Gary, I understand. Listen, I've known that private security has always been very prevalent amongst areas of Jewish people, schools, care homes, synagogues. How will Jews be reacting to this news tonight in areas of London and Manchester and Birmingham, do you think? Do you think that there'll be more street patrols? Because as I understand, there's an organisation, a charitable organisation maybe called Shomrim.
Shomrim.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about Shomrim, please.
They tend to work in the more religious Jewish areas, particularly among the Haredim.
Yeah.
They're very competent in what they do, and they add added security. But our main Jewish security organisation is the CST, the Community Security Trust, which is the leading group who protects Jews at events.
And how do they protect Jews?
Well, firstly, if you want to organise a Jewish event, you contact them, and they send people to firstly advise you on what you should do to minimise the risk of a problem. And then, of course, they send security guards, and they also have a lot of volunteers, a big volunteer network.
And what about street patrols?
As I said, the Shomrim do some of that, certainly.
These are just people walking around with walkie-talkies.
No, the Shomrim are organised, and a number of people prefer to talk to the Shomrim.
But they're on foot, is my point.
Yes.
Yeah, and what are they looking out for, do you think? Vandalism, fire, arson, anti-Semitism? What sort of forms would that take, do you think?
Any or all of those, what you just said.
OK. And then they call the police?
Yes.
I wondered, on a slightly different note, you mentioned that the government's been the UK government has been too passive, in your view. And obviously, I'm sure you'd agree that we give Keir Starmer some credit for what he did in opposition as Labour Party leader to rid the Labour Party of the horrendous Corbyn led, in my view.
Really rid of it completely?
Well, unfortunately, I think there will always, as you mentioned, you know, the far left. This is a cancer on the hard left. Luckily, many members of the hard left have left the Labour Party, and we've seen that in membership numbers, and they're going to places like the Green Party and the SWP.
We now have a Home Secretary who actually participated in the marches herself when she wasn't Home Secretary.
So my question to you is, I wonder what practically you would like to see the UK government doing. You know, what should Keir Starmer do tomorrow? We all know what he's going to say, but what should he do practically?
He needs to look at policies that are going to reduce anti-Semitism. The first of them he can do is to stop the marches. This is what I believe Reform UK have been calling for. I believe Kemi Badenoch has sort of called for, but it hasn't happened. It started under the Conservative government, who were completely incapable of dealing with the matter, and accelerated under the Labour government. So the first thing is to stop the marches. The second thing I think needs doing is looking at different areas of public life where we can stop anti-Semitism. For example, those who work in the NHS should not be allowed to wear Free Palestine badges. That's a political statement, and it should not be permitted. School children should be able to fight against anti-Semitism far better and have supporters. I've got friends who've got children in state schools who regularly suffer from anti-Semitic activity. Even little things like at a football match where some of the children wear Free Palestine sweatshirts. It's absolutely appalling. We've got to actually get right to the nitty-gritty of individual situations where anti-Semitism is cropping up. You may see also there's also the two-tier approach in the courts, which applies not just to the Jewish community, of course, it applies to the non-Jewish community too. The case of Lucy Connolly recently. But then there's also in entertainment and in sport and in other areas, and indeed in businesses. We see subtle discrimination against Jews. These have to be called out, dealt with properly, with stringent punishments. That's what the government should be doing.
And on the protest point, how would you square banning those protests with freedom of speech, freedom of expression? Are we saying there has to be a hierarchy and stopping and sort of stemming anti-Semitism is more important?
Differentiate. Now, this is a major argument, of course, but you have to be able to differentiate between freedom of speech and hate speech. And so much of the content of the slogans on these marches has descended into hate speech. It's gone beyond the idea of freedom of speech. If you had one event once every now and again to talk about Palestine and there was no hate speech and it was a static event, I think that would be an improvement. But unfortunately, we see tremendous amounts of hate speech on these marches and have been for the last 2.5 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a shocker. Repeated protest march after protest march after protest march, Jewish people leaving the cities where these marches were happening because it wasn't safe, and then you had people on the left saying, oh, well, I've been to the protest marches and there are Jewish people in the protests. It's all very... And
yes, there's a tiny percentage of Jews who hate Israel. It's true, a very small percentage. It's very interestingly how the publicity works in that the Haredi community are believed to be anti-Israel. They have a group in it called the Necharai Kartai. They account for 1% of the Haredi community. Most Haredim are not anti-Israel at all.
See, there did seem to be a lot of people justifying their presence on a lot of the marches, but
yes,
it was quite clear to me...
twisting the media image.
Well, it's kind of like a butterfly effect, isn't it? That you allow one thing, then it leads to another, then it leads to another, until you've got a ripple effect that then ends up with violence and what we're seeing in Australia, which I think is quite frightening. Well, if you've just joined us, welcome on board. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. You're probably aware of what has happened in Australia. Let's speak now to GB News' Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who joins us. But just to update you, a British-born rabbi was among one of the 12 who was killed in the gun attack on Bondi Beach. At least 12 people, including a British-born rabbi, have died and 29 were injured when 2 terrorist gunmen targeted a Jewish celebration in Bondi Beach. Thank you very much to you, Gary Mond, for joining us. We appreciate your thoughts. Mark White joins us now. Mark, what more can you tell us?
Well, the breaking news this hour is that Rabbi Eli Schlanger, a British-born rabbi, was among those killed on Bondi Beach earlier today. His family have now confirmed this. The 41-year-old was a father of 5. In fact, a young son just born in recent months. Rabbi Schlanger, we're told, was born in northwest London and moved with his family as a child to New York before then marrying an Australian and moving down to Australia to begin his life there. But that news we can confirm to you now. Rabbi Eli Schlanger, a British-born rabbi now living in Australia with his wife and 5 young children, among those who were shot dead on Bondi Beach earlier today by 2 terrorists in what the Australian authorities have confirmed was a terrorist attack specifically targeting members of the Jewish community gathered there in very significant numbers for those Hanukkah celebrations that got underway in the early evening in Australia. They are getting underway in the early evening here in the UK as well. And to that end, the Metropolitan Police more than aware of the real concern that there is throughout the Jewish community in London and elsewhere in the UK, especially in the light of that recent terrorist attack in October at the Jewish synagogue in Manchester. The Metropolitan Police are stepping up their police presence at a number of planned events, including a candle lighting ceremony at Trafalgar Square starting this evening, that is expected to be attended by many members of the Jewish community and others who want to observe that spectacle marking the start of the festival of light. So some real concern. Clearly, as far as the Australian authorities are concerned, they are piecing together bit by bit the sequence of events that unfolded. It was 6:47 in the evening in Sydney, Australia, when the police began getting multiple emergency calls reporting an active shooter situation. They sent very significant resources. There were police in the area anyway because of the crowds that were on Bondi Beach at that time anyway for this Hanukkah celebration. And just generally, of course, just enjoying the world-renowned Bondi Beach. So they were quickly on scene, but that then descended into effectively a firefight that lasted for many minutes, about 6 or 7 minutes. I was watching a video earlier that I think is probably the most accurate, the longest, continued account of how this event unfolded. And you saw both gunmen on a little bridge overlooking the area of the end of Bondi Beach where the Hanukkah celebrations were taking place. And they were opening fire with long-barreled weapons. And although the police did turn up, you could hear the sirens, it took a very significant time before both men were eventually shot and subdued by the police. One of those men has since died. We don't know the name of both men, but we certainly know the name of one of the men. That man was 24-year-old Naveed Akram. His driver's license was recovered at the scene. That said that he lived in the Bonnyrigg suburb of Sydney, and very interestingly, we've had reports of very significant police activity, specialist search teams and armed units that raided a home in the Bonnyrigg area of Sydney in the hours and minutes after this attack unfolded. The 24-year-old Naveed Akram was seen firing a long-barreled weapon with telescopic sights from that bridge down onto the crowds further down towards Bondi Beach. The other man, a slightly older gentleman by the looks of it, we do not have a name for at this stage. But that man, that gunman, was tackled in the most incredible way by a member of the public, a local greengrocer by the name of Ahmed El Ahmed, a 43-year-old greengrocer from the Sydney area, who really showed the most incredible courage, running up between a couple of parked cars, jumping on this gunman, wrestling the shotgun that he was holding at that point, wrestling it from his hands, and then effectively turning the gun on the gunman. The gunman then just staggered off back onto the bridge where his colleague was continuing to fire down. We're being told that that hero greengrocer, Ahmed Al Ahmed, was injured himself, injured in the shoulder, injured in the leg, one of those seriously injured. In fact, 29 people have been injured, and the authorities in Sydney are warning people that the death toll is likely to rise. At the moment, that death toll is 11 innocent members of the public and one suspected gunman killed by the actions of the New South Wales police. So the operation continuing now into the wee small hours in Sydney with very significant emergency service personnel, detectives, forensic teams, as you can see at the scene there, piecing together what they can of the events.
All right, Mark White, thank you very much for that update. Let's speak to former Scotland Yard detective Mike Neville, who joins us now. Mike, thank you so much for getting on board on the programme. I want to ask you, How difficult is it to obtain a gun in Australia? A lot of people may not be aware of what the gun laws are there. What are they?
Well, there's different. Obviously, there's 6 different states in Australia. So, and this occurred in New South Wales. New South Wales has some of the most highly regulated gun laws in Australia. So, I would suggest to buy a gun legally would be very difficult. You have to pay for a license in New South Wales. You have to comply with various regulations and laws. But the trouble is, of course, is that you could travel across to a different state, which has got slacker gun laws. Of course, places like the Northern Territories, that's a very rural area where people would go hunting and farming and the like. So the gun control is going to be less there. But it's like guns in the United Kingdom, that it's often far easier to obtain one illegally than it is legally. So it'd be interesting to see where they've got these two. It appears to be one was a shotgun and another was looks like a high-powered rifle with a telescopic sight. So the latter would obviously have far more restrictions than a shotgun, which you could argue you could use on a farm.
And for those who can get guns, how old do they have to be?
I think the rules in Australia are something like 18, it may be 21. In the UK, it's you're looking at 18 to buy weapons.
So your thoughts on this this awful tragedy? What do you think as you see this, and mainly in terms of the way anti-Semitism sort of permeated every nook and cranny, every country we're seeing anti-Semitism in its worst form?
Well, when you say every country, it's really places with Western governments, particularly those with the sort of left-leaning side. And I was listening to a Jewish commentator on this event, and just like this country, you've got areas in Sydney where the left-wing vote is really reliant on heavily Muslim voters. So it really mirrors the United Kingdom. And the problem is then that some of the Jewish community, what they're saying is that the head of the Australian Jewish Association is saying that the Prime Minister has let them down. You know, they've been warning consistently about anti-Semitic incidents. There was a synagogue firebomb. There's been all sorts of attempted arsons across the country, you know, Sydney and in Melbourne. And the Jewish community just feel let down. Of course, we see the same in this country. When I speak to my Jewish friends, my heart goes out that they feel afraid to say go to central London, and it will be the same. Bondi Beach is a tourist area. It should be a happy place for everybody, shouldn't it, to enjoy? You know, we're in the middle of freezing cold winter here. It's summer in Australia. This is a place where people should be happy, should be able to enjoy themselves with their families. And here we have another wicked and evil terrorist attack on Jewish people.
Do you think it's really unfair that Jewish people have been, for so many years, been forced to, in a sense, police themselves, because they have been, as you said, warning that there'll be an attack of this nature, pleading with the authorities to do something about it, but there's no other community that I know of that has to behave in the manner that the Jewish people have to keep themselves safe?
You're absolutely right. I was asked to go by a friend to his synagogue and speak about forensic science, and I was met with a sort of big fence and a security guard in London. You think, and this is about 5-6 years ago, you think, what sort of place do we live in where, you know, a place of worship, a synagogue, has got to be behind this fence with security staff? And from a sort of family point of view, my grandfather was at the liberation of Belsen. I just can't imagine what he would think to see this. And it is throughout the West, though, we got this lunacy of recognising a non-existent state, Palestine, by both the government here and the Prime Minister Albanese in Australia has done the same. And it's just, all that does is, in my view, is stab the Jewish community in the back. It just achieves nothing else. It just leaves them even more vulnerable. And it just makes some of the extreme Palestinian supporters feel even more confident in their wickedness.
Well, Mike, I'm going to bring in one of my panellists, Danny Kelly, who wants to pose a question to you.
Hiya, Mike. Danny Kelly here. You mentioned something earlier about it probably being easier to get a shotgun, not legally, but illegitimately. There was a case about 2 years ago, and it featured on a Channel 4 documentary, 24 Hours in Police Custody, about a young 19-year-old lad who killed his mother and who killed his sister. And then he was prevented from going on a school rampage. He had a fascination with American-style mass shootings, Mike. And he actually got the shotgun. I don't know whether you're aware of this. This fella's called Nicholas Prosper. He actually deceived a private gun seller online. This is so simple, using a forged shotgun licence to acquire the weapon. Now, we're sitting in the studio in London today. I've got friends of mine who are at Birmingham Christmas market, surrounded by armed police from West Midlands Police, having to walk through these massive metal structures to prevent cars going on a vehicular rampage. Would you like to comment about how easy it is, Mike, to actually forge documentation and acquire guns, and I'm going to put this in inverted commas, legally?
Well, anything online is going to be very suspect. We saw Axel Ruder-Cabana buying knives online, lying and using a false documents. I mean, knives are very difficult to control because everybody's got them in the kitchen. Guns are easier. But the trouble, as I said, with shotguns is that farmers have a very legitimate use for them. I can't think of any real legitimate use for a private citizen having an AK-47 or a sniper rifle like we saw here. But the shotguns are going to be very, very difficult. But I think there really is a case for banning guns to be sold online. There's no reason for it. I think you should have to turn up and show your face so you can be caught on CCTV. The person knows you're dealing with the actual person whose documentation is being shown. But it is far too easy to trick people and deceive them online and then obtain things which are dangerous to everybody else.
I find it shocking that you can actually buy a gun online. I think that should be banned. What do you think, Mike, should be the next move for the Australian government? And I suspect what they do to protect Jewish people will probably be mirrored here, because it can't go on, Jewish people having to protect themselves and having to pay for their own security, having to accompany their kids to school in a manner that is not like any other place. I can't think of any other place, and as you say, in Western countries in particular, where that is a factor. What can the government or what can the police, what needs to happen now?
Well, they need to be honest about it. We see in this country, don't we, that too much of the prevent time is taken up on a sort of a far-right threat, which is often non-existent, whereas the threat from Islamic terrorists is really real. And we all know it is not all Muslims involved. The guy who stopped the shooting today, Mr. Ahmed, is a Muslim. We know that's a fact. But we've got to be honest about this. And the first thing the authorities need to do is get every available police officer out there patrolling, making sure communities feel safe. In the longer term, though, they need to look at everybody who is a threat and make sure there's something dealt with them. But every day in this country, and Australia is better than us, undocumented young men arrive who look very much like the two men involved in this shooting, and they're allowed to wander free. And this is absolute madness. If you come to this country like that, or you go to Australia, and they say you should be put in a camp, and your documentation, your identity, your motives should be checked until you're anywhere allowed to wander. Because let's find out where these two are from. And the authorities, of course, have got to look into what they knew about them already, because too often we hear, oh, there was some threat, somebody had contacted them and it had been ignored. And one of the biggest things about the West is the fear of racism. The authorities are so frightened to death of this, is that everybody from the lowest constable to the commissioner of the police, the worst thing you can say about them is they're racist, and it stops people's careers, it gets them sacked, and we need to stop being so naive and stupid.
Oh, well, obviously there's no evidence that these guys were migrants or illegal migrants, as it were. And to be fair to Australia, their immigration policy is quite strict. Yeah. They're pretty good at that one. So, but I want to bring in Andy Williams to the conversation. He has a question for you.
Yeah, Mike, our previous guest, Gary Mond, said that he would like to see the government introduce a ban on the pro-Palestine protests that we've seen in London for going on for years now. What do you make of that suggestion, and how should the police be thinking about balancing, some of the really, really distasteful scenes that have occurred at those protests with the right to protest, which is a really fundamentally important aspect?
Well, I think, yes, it's a very difficult balance. But if they want to do these marches, let's say you can do it in Hyde Park. So if you're going to do it, you march around, you can walk around Hyde Park. Everything will be videoed. Everything will be recorded. There'll be a large police presence. These are the phrases and words which are completely unacceptable. Anybody uttering them seen uttering them, heard uttering them, will be arrested. And let's be ruthless. The police showed they could be ruthless. When it came to the Palestine action, the arrest there, where they arrested 500 people all over Trafalgar Square and the like, the police have shown that they can do this, and they need to be more robust. But as I say, firstly, you set the ground. You're not marching all the way through central London. You can have your freedom of speech, but that's going to be in Hyde Park or some other venue. Secondly, we're going to video and record everybody who's on that march, and if they say any of these wicked things, which in essence mean we're going to kill Jews or destroy Israel, then you will be arrested and ruthlessly dealt with.
What about balaclavas? Will you ban those as well? Because some of them are covering their face, and you're going to have facial recognition cameras, presumably.
Well, absolutely, because it only takes an inspector, though. An inspector can give the authority that the law will be imposed, that you cannot have face covering. So that, in a sense, the legislation exists for that already, and if you refuse to remove that face covering, then you're under arrest. So yes, that would be easily dealt with.
But what if you came in a burqa?
Well, if you came in a burqa, I would I would insist, if you're going to walk around that burqa, you will take it off, and you have your face photograph, and you don't take part in the march. We've said there's no face coverings. There is no face coverings. That's a face covering. Go home.
No, I think that's a really interesting suggestion, Mike, about sort of identifying a specific area where people have to protest. Because I must admit, I am a bit uncomfortable. I hear what Gary was saying. I'm a bit uncomfortable with the idea that you should ban those protests completely. I think that maybe is a step too far. I'm not sure it gets the balance right. But saying you have to protest in a confined space at this time on this day, and absolutely, if you want to go out there and express your view, you should be prepared for your, to be videoed and for your photo to be taken. So I think that's a good balance, actually.
I think also that if you do say things like that, rather than you can put them in custody, but I think, Mike, do you not think that perhaps there could be a fine as well? Because I think once it hits someone's pocket and they have to pay for, so they have to pay for, I don't know, a charge of maybe 500 quid or something. That money will go towards some charity that helps. Do you know what I mean, Mike? Do you think that
the only problem with that, I think, is these organisations are probably funded from abroad. I have no doubts that people who kind of destabilise the West would fund them, and so no one's really worried about money in the sense that somebody else would pay it. But when you go to jail, you do the jail time yourself, and there's no way out of that. So that's why I think jail is much more appropriate than fines.
You can have both. You could do both.
You can have both, but I really do think that there is some sort of coordination of these matters from abroad, and finance will be available. So you can fine them £1 million, and somebody will find £1 million for them to pay off.
Well, maybe, but there'll be some people who just hang on and get involved in it because, a lot of those on the far left who haven't really got a clue what they're protesting for, who've just come along for a jolly. It became a sort of weekly event for some people who get the coach, the boogie bus, I don't know what they called it, that would bring them from wherever it was to come and congeal in London and cause chaos.
Be in no doubt that there are bandwagon jumpers everywhere on these protests.
They would be afraid of the fine. I think they should be fined, the prison thing as well, the record, all of those things, I think, together would stop a lot of people. Do you not think, Mike?
It would stop a lot of... I think it would stop a lot of the hangers-on. Like I said, when I was a young policeman, you go into London, and whether it was stop the bomb, save the whale, or whatever, ban the war, it would be the same individuals in their, ponytails and sandals and socks, really. So I think you would get rid of some of those, possibly with a £500 fine. But there are some very hardline people, and as I say, they're probably financed from abroad. They've got no need to worry about money. What we need to do is put them in jail, and then we need to look at where they're from, and if we can deport them, we need to ship them out. It's gone too far, and I think everybody is now noticing that. I always say this, that Douglas Murray refers to it as the crime of noticing, and people are noticing that our communities are changing. There are real fractures in society where people are completely separate. The only thing the Prime Minister's ever said that I agreed with is that we are an island of strangers, and he retracted that, but we are an island of strangers, and we can't have it where, votes are being cast in Oldham about things going on in Gaza.
Mike, it's Danny again. Mike, I don't know when you left the force, Scotland Yard, as a detective, but whether it was in the last 5-10 years, if you're still in touch with your pals at the Met, have they told you about the watch list? Because we understand that there's a terror watch list, and I know MI5 is different to Scotland Yard, but you all talk to each other. Has that number plateaued, or is it increasing with we're hearing about so many people coming into this country illegally. Is that having a proportionate effect on the watch list that you know of?
Of course, the number of terrorist suspects goes up and up and up. And it seemed almost impossible to keep a track on tens of thousands of people who pose a really serious risk to this country. And yet we have a situation where it's been allowed to go on. And let's say, whether it's Sydney, Australia, or London in England, the authorities have allowed this to happen. Their biggest fear is not these terrorist attacks. It's been accused of racism. And what this results in is that people don't act. And at the most basic level, if you looked at, I heard today that it took some time for the police to react, to start shooting back. It's tragic that officers lost their lives, but I go back to the Manchester Arena bombing, where the young security guard, he saw a baby with a massive rucksack, Asian man with a massive rucksack on his back, outside a concert which would generally be attended by young teenage girls. He was out of place. But the young security guard felt afraid to do anything because he might be accused of the most wicked crime on the earth, racism. And as a result of that, we have more than 20 people dead. And how often do the police react slowly? Because you cannot blame officers who have to react quickly, but then they're in the back of their head. They've had a colleague tried for murder, for just doing his job. And this really, the police response is being handicapped because of Western establishment guilt.
Yeah, it is really quite shocking that kind of behaviour still goes on. But the bottom line is this person, these people who perpetrated this heinous act may well be Australian citizens, may not have come there illegally. Most people can't really get into Australia illegally. They're probably citizens of Australia. We'll wait and we'll get all the details. It will be interesting to see. Do you think, Mike, in this country, though, that multiculturalism has failed?
Utterly failed, because some people never integrate. In northern towns, there are two parts. A lot of Jewish people integrate, Hindu people integrate, Caribbean people integrate. The biggest problem is large areas of Muslim immigrants, particularly from the poorer areas of places like Pakistan and Bangladesh, where there is no integration at all. It simply is an island of strangers, and that is no good for any community whatsoever. As I say, many aspects have worked. People come here, like I say, from the Caribbean, where it's a very British-style culture, and in fact more exaggerated than British people sometimes. Likewise with Hindu people. But the real issue is in Muslim communities where then Islamists can hide away, and they've got to hide a place to bolt back to. That's where the problem lies, and we've got to be honest about this, else we'll never solve the problem.
And just to remind you, we're not talking about the everyday, normal, good Muslim people, of which there are many, and they are the majority. In this case, we're talking about
my brother-in-law's a doctor. Yeah. My brother-in-law's a Muslim doctor in Germany, so I'm fully aware. And we only have to look at the man who stopped the shooting. But the facts are, these threats come from the Muslim community, and we've got to be honest about this. That's where the integration issue lies, and we can't keep pretending it doesn't.
All right, well, listen, Mike, it's been really good to talk to you. That is Mike Neville. He's a former Scotland Yard detective. If you've just joined us, welcome. This is GBNews, just coming up to 4:30. I'm Nana Akua. We are, of course, discussing the awful incident that happened on Bondi Beach, where 12 people were killed, one of which, as we now know, is a British-born Jewish rabbi. Well, GBNews presenter Josh Howie joins me in the studio. Josh, really, really tragic news.
Yeah, another day waking up to murdered Jews on the other side of the world. And it's, the fear of it becoming normalised. It seems shocking, but this has happened again and again. It happened a couple of months in this country, and now it's happening in Australia.
Do you not think that anti-Semitism has been normalised already in this country?
Well, it's certainly been emboldened, absolutely, the last 2 years. I mean, the reality was it's been around, it never goes away properly, but it's been emboldened over the last 2 years. And actually, it's been longer than that, because it was just even 2 years before that, I think, that 2021, there was a Hanukkah, there was an attack on young Jews, Jewish kids in London, handing out donuts, which is what you do on tradition. There was an attack, these three appearing to be Middle Eastern men, and swearing, spitting at them. This is on Oxford Street in central London. Nothing ever happened. There was very clear, these three men, they were very clearly identified. You could see exactly who they were, and they were never tracked down somehow. How do we have the resources of the police who can't find these three men and hold them to account? So that's the level of, like I say, the emboldenment we've seen from the authorities.
Why do you think they're not taking it seriously?
Because I think it's a myriad of factors. I think one is, frankly, cowardice, standing up to the more extreme elements of the Muslim community in particular. And I hesitate to say, I don't know if it's laziness, but being at these protests and being like part of the counter-protesters, it's just always easier to deal with the small group of people. There are 250,000 Jews in the UK. There are millions of more Muslims in the UK. And certainly at these protests, the police just want to, and that's understandable in terms, they want to just go home and with the least amount of resistance, but also they have to protect the rights of everybody here. And what they repeatedly show is that they'll protect the rights of the protesters to shout genocidal chants, but they won't protect the rights of Jews to stand up to that.
Well, look, a lot of people blame Anthony Albanese for this, for the lack of support towards the Jewish people. Do you blame a lot of the politicians for this? I mean, we had the Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn and the anti-Semitism within that party.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you wake up to something like this and it's horrible, but you're certainly not surprised, because the maddening thing is that the Jewish community and our allies have been shouting this for years now, shouting for the authorities to do something. And it's been very clear. You can see the footage coming out of mosques. You can see the hate that's been nurtured and not challenged. And then you can also see the politicians who've done their best to ignore it.
What about recognising Palestine as a state? Was that a wise thing to do? I mean,
it was a betrayal of an ally, but it was a betrayal of British Jews and really a betrayal of the West, because Israel is fighting really on behalf of the entire West against jihadists. And to recognise the state of Palestine, by the way, I want there to be a state of Palestine at some point when that society is ready, which I frankly don't believe they are at this point. But to do that is to reward terrorism, and that's what Starmer did, that's what Macron did, and it was disgusting, frankly.
Well, look, we can now bring you live pictures from Trafalgar Square, where the menorah is being lit to mark the start of Hanukkah. It's very symbolic, this, isn't it, that it's being lit to mark the start of it. This is obviously something that you would have done every year.
Yeah, absolutely. And my family right now are, I don't even want to, frankly, I don't actually want to say where they are.
I don't do that.
But they're somewhere in a public gathering celebrating the start of Hanukkah, which is a joyful time. It's a time of, it's the festival of lights. It's a time of eating lots of chocolate and eating souf galiot, eating donuts. And it's a happy festival, and now it's not.
I was going to say, the Jewish people know how to party. Every time there's another celebrating another thing, something else.
That's
and
it.
that's, that is wonderful. I mean, Jewish people, in my view, are absolutely wonderful. I've not really met any horrible people who are Jewish. I don't understand the constant attack on them, and I think that this whole racism towards Jewish people is shocking, and the fact that it's been allowed to go on and on and on like this. For you, when you were growing up, what was it like? Did you have to have people walking you to school?
No, none of that. I mean, I lived through the golden era,
yeah.
Post-Holocaust world where, there's bits of anti-Semitism at school, but of the type of Jews being stingy, it's almost like I wish we could go back to those times compared to where we're at now, where Jews are getting murdered for being Jews. And you called it, absolutely, it's racism. People will say, oh, this was a terrorist attack. This was a racist attack driven by pure hatred against Jews. Now, we have to look at where is that hatred coming from and be honest about it. And that's what the problem is, that the politicians certainly, and our media to a degree, just aren't honest about the racism that frankly exists within the Muslim community. Now, that's not to say that all Muslims are prejudiced by any means, but there is a racist problem within the Muslim community, and unfortunately, you have the extreme racists, you have Muslims who will indulge it, and then the Muslims who stand up to it are shut down themselves.
But they would argue that there's a lot of anti-Muslim hate, and actually, in this instance, the shopkeeper who, wrestled the gunman to the ground at great danger to himself was actually Muslim.
Well, absolutely. So let's look at the difference between these two men. Two men who are both Muslims. We don't know the exact backgrounds, but one took the best lessons of Islam. And did that with bravery to defeat evil. And someone else took the worst lessons of Islam. And every religion, by the way, has its extremist sides, but it's about how much this is indulged and who is paying to indulge it. So within the UK, you've got mosques preaching hate towards Jews. And what happens when they're reported, when they put that footage out there, they're proud of it. They put it on the internet. And when this is exposed, well, what happens? Nothing happens. It goes to the Charity Commission and they essentially do nothing, a slap on the wrist. Well, you could argue that, and I'm hosting Free Speech Nation later, but this is not to say if they want to preach hate, that's their free speech, right? But does our state need to actually enable it?
Do you think that some of the politicians, and when I say they're to blame because they're so busy trying to get the Muslim vote, which is larger than the Jewish vote, that they appease the Muslim side of the argument because they're worried that they won't keep their seats for the next election?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's just very obvious that that's what they're doing. And it's not just the politicians. We've got the West Midlands Police, the same thing. And again, they have seemingly made stuff up and lied, all to appease the more extreme elements within the Muslim community in Birmingham.
Well, of course, they're not here to defend themselves, but I hear what you're saying. Andy wants to ask you something.
Yeah, I firstly, on recognition of Palestine, I completely agree. I want to see a two-state solution. I want to see a Palestinian state eventually, but not when it's in the grip of a terrorist organisation, which is Hamas. So to grant statehood, or to recognise statehood, should I say, at a time when a place is in the grip of a terrorist organisation is madness. And I think it links to that point that Nana was just making, the political point. Labour at the next election could lose as many as 40 seats to Muslim independents. All over the country. In London, where Streeting seats under threat, Birmingham, Leeds, all over the country. I know that because Number 10 have done private polling. They could lose as many as 40 seats. I believe that Keir Starmer decided now was the time to recognise Palestine, to try and ward off that electoral threat. And that is not a basis on which to make that decision.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's very clear that that's what he did. And I think it's such a cynical decision and such an immoral decision. And what people actually respond to, whoever they are and what religious denomination they are, people respond to clear moral guidance. And that is what he, frankly, is lacking.
Well, maybe he would argue that he did that because he thought that it might help to appease the Hamas in some way, but then would help to calm the situation a little bit. I mean, I'm not saying that he supports Hamas in any way, shape or form, but he might have done it to kind of pacify, and I don't know. I mean, I can't...
Josh, I remember a couple of years ago, there was a convoy of cars going through an area of London with Palestinian flags waving outside the sunroofs, and people actually sitting on the roof of cars and screaming abuse at Jews and things like that. You made a point earlier, I think it was yourself who made a point that there's, like, I'm going to use the words two-tier, with policing. I mean, I don't know whether you live in an area of London. I'm assuming you live in London. I don't know if you live in an area of London which is, if you like, a Jewish area. What's the security like? I asked the question to Gary Mond earlier about the private security that do street patrols, but what's it like? Because I dare say today is going to be, and the coming weeks and months, is going to be an incredibly difficult time to be a visible Jew in London.
Absolutely. Well, that incident, which happened before October 7th...
Was that before October 7th?
That was before October 7th. And, as you say, groups of cars driving around North London saying through loudspeakers that they were going to rape Jewish women, rape Jewish mothers and daughters. they were identified because they, you know, their license plates. No one eventually, actually, the CPS chose not to prosecute
No one
any
got
of
nicked?
those. No one ever served any time or has received any punishment for
No one
that.
got nicked even?
No, I believe they were arrested and then they didn't know what... They supposedly couldn't identify exactly who said who, which I personally don't believe. That's my personal decision, my personal opinion. But you're right, my kids go to Jewish schools. When we go to synagogue, the security there is off the scale. And today, Mayor Sadiq Khan, he said, we're going to get some more police out to these public Hanukkah lighting of candle events. That's all well and good, but let's actually use that. That's not the problem, is to sort of further ghettoise Jews and sort of protect us around. That's not actually going to solve the issue here.
I was wondering, is it actually the right thing to do to be sending more police? A genuine question. Is it the right thing to do to be sending more police out on the streets today? Does that send the wrong message in some ways?
I think that there are going to be many Jewish people who will be grateful to see police at these events.
Yep.
But ultimately, that's not going to solve the problem here. That's not where the police need to be directed to actually ensure the safety of Jews in this country and democracy in this country.
Yeah.
Well, it's a shame that the government sort of didn't intervene a little bit earlier, so it didn't get to this place. But you know, I just kind of look at it and think that there are so many things that have sort of made this situation where there could have been some sort of intervention where the government could have, you know, minimised the issue. What do you think now specifically the government need to do? Because at the moment, people are very concerned. As was mentioned, Andy said, more police. A lot of people will be happy with that. But moving forward, how can we...
Well, recognise what the problem is. There's a very clear... Which is the racists who exist within the Muslim community. Stop trying to appease that and actually let's deal with that problem. And but then the first thing that you have to do, of course, is just acknowledge what it is. Now, those racists are being emboldened by far-left racists, by... you know, the marchers that we see out there. It's certainly not everybody... on these marches are Muslim. There's a lot of not a-religious people, non-religious people as well. But anti-Zionism, it is a racist movement, and we have to actually start recognising that that's what it is. It is about saying that Jews don't have the right to self-determination. And it's just a new form of anti-Semitism, and this needs to be called out, and it needs to be called out with bravery by our politicians. And, you know, to be fair, Rachel Reeves, she gave a speech, I think about a week ago, where, you know, you don't have to be a fan of her economic policies such as they can be defined, but she did stand up and said, I am a Zionist, and she very clearly called this out. But
I don't know.
This is 2 years too late.
No, I don't know. I don't even know whether she wrote it or even read it before she said it. I don't know. What I mean, Keir Starmer said
I think that's a bit unfair. She has a very Jewish constituency in Leeds. But
I mean, listen, I'm just saying, because I hear a lot of them say a lot of things, and half the time Keir Starmer even admitted at one point that he didn't even read the speech before he said it, and that was the Island of Strangers, which was literally the only good thing that he's actually said, didn't he?
Just to go back to Andy's point, it just illustrates Josh's point about self-interest with politicians. So if Rachel Reeves has a strong Jewish community in her constituency, then all of a sudden she says she's a Zionist.
No, I don't think
that might be even too cynical for me. I think she might made a clear moral decision. But I think that if someone had said at the beginning very clearly, if Starmer had stood up and said, look, I am a Zionist, this is what Zionism means, then we would be, I think, in a different place, certainly within this country.
I'm not sure we would if he said that. I don't think, again, I'm not being rude, but I don't think anyone would believe him, and again, would believe that he even wrote and read the speech before he said it.
Well, I think it does. I mean, whoever he or she is, I think it does matter what the Prime Minister says. Words matter, actions matter too.
Actions speak louder than words.
Actions speak louder than words. But one thing that I find concerning is we're seeing, if we're looking at this through a sort of UK political lens for a minute, we're seeing more and more extremist, anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist elements in British politics. You had the absurd spectacle at the Your Party conference, was it 2 weeks ago?
Is that what they're calling themselves now?
That is what they're calling themselves.
So they've actually kept that name?
Yes, hilariously. And you saw people going up to Jeremy Corbyn, of all people, and saying, you're not a true friend of Palestine. And, I mean, if there are people who are outflanking Jeremy Corbyn let's be frank, on anti-Semitism, being more anti-Semitic than he has been in his long career. I mean, he was rightly incredulous, saying, what do you think I've been doing all my life? My point being, there are people even further to the left, on the hard left, who are pursuing a more and more and more radical anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic approach.
Well, you've got the Queers for Palestine, which makes no sense at all. People who clearly don't understand what they are promoting because they're not realistic about what it's all about. I think a lot of people don't understand the mindset, so they're jumping on this bandwagon of misunderstanding, thinking they're doing something good. You know, they're worrying about the children in Gaza. We all worry about people being killed in war. That is war.
Absolutely, and it is tragic.
Yeah,
Any innocent death
is.
is tragic.
Yeah.
But we're talking, this red-green alliance is so ridiculous, where you've got left-wing people supporting radical Islamists who would subjugate women, kill gay people, and kill all Jews in the world if they could. And the left think of themselves as anti-racist as they support this position.
Well, of course, that is the extremist position. As I said, we've got to come back to the fact that most Muslims are...
No, I'm talking about radical Islam.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and we're seeing it in all areas of policy. I mean, we saw I forget what his name was, but we saw the spectacle of one of the independent Muslim MPs standing up in Parliament recently defending cousin marriage. I mean, again, that is not a sort of majority Muslim position, I don't think, but if you've got people in Parliament who are advocating for those sorts of positions, that is concerning.
Well, actually, I remember a story. I wouldn't say it's a majority, but it might be a healthy minority position. I remember covering a story for the BBC in Birmingham about Birmingham Children's Hospital that had a massive amount of young kids with birth defects, which could be traced back directly to first cousin marriages. And we mustn't kid ourselves that this is a problem within... in Birmingham, there are silos. There are areas which just haven't integrated.
Well, that's multiculturalism, isn't it?
Well, it's the lack of multiculturalism.
No, that's what... that is multiculturalism. So multiculturalism, in its definition, are little silos of different things.
Lack of diversity.
So there's a lot of diversity, but no integration.
Yeah, lack of diversity.
But a multicultural society of people from all different cultures.
So I think that MP who was advocating first cousin marriage, I wouldn't say that was a majority view, but if it's not a majority, I'd say it was a healthy minority view.
Yeah, and you know, worse than that, you had the NHS put out a statement justifying cousin marriage.
Really?
Yeah, justifying.
Never.
I didn't see that.
No, they withdrew it, but it was on their website for a bit.
And this is Birmingham Children's Hospital. Most of the kids had poor eyes going off in different directions and things, which is... It's a tragedy.
But these are cultural issues. Correct. And again, if we're just going to get these criticisms of culture being sort of mislabeled as racist, then we're not going to deal with these issues at all.
Some people have looked at this. We spoke to Mike Neville, and he sort of pointed to our uncontrolled immigration. Australia, I don't think they suffer from that because they have very good border policies. You can't really get in there that easily. But in this country, do you think that we risk exacerbating the situation if we don't get a handle on our borders?
Of course, because if young men and the sort of cliche goes of fighting age are coming over, but really it's not young Vietnamese men who are the problem here. So, or young Ukrainian men, or it's young men from a particular set of cultures, particularly within the Middle East, that have anti-Western and anti-Semitic sort of education shoved down their throats from a very young age, and they are coming over with that hate and with a different set of cultural values in terms of how women are treated and gay people are treated than the UK. Now, is it possible to come over and reject those those cultural leanings? Like, it's maybe, but at least we have to again address what the problem is. Not if we're just going to sort of pretend that diversity is our strength and that there isn't a problem here, that there aren't these people who are coming into our country who frankly hate Jews, hate the West, hate gay people, hate women.
And sort of moving forward, this is going to be a very frightening time for most Jewish people. I mean, I'm speaking at something, at a Jewish event, and I'm suddenly looking at it thinking, I'm going to do it, I'm not going to not do that. You know, but, you know, you then sort of reassess your own safety and your own position.
Hanukkah is, you know, it's the Festival of Lights, and it's the one festival, the one mitzvah commandment where you're meant to be very public about it. That's the point of it. It's a miracle that is meant to be shared with the world. And so this is why you get, if people are driving through different city centres, you might see this big Hanukkah, the big menorah out there, because it's the one time of year where Jews go, let's get out and really celebrate this part of our culture. And again, tonight, my family are out somewhere within the UK, and yes, I'm a little bit scared, but I'm also a little bit scared every time we have to take the kids to school, or every time I go to synagogue now.
And just so for the viewers and listeners, why is there such hatred towards Jewish people? What is it about the Jewish people that is hated? I don't really, because I don't get it.
Well, it's this is so much of this is from a sort of jihadist. If you look at what happened on October 7th, Hamas, the people who are raised, unfortunately, within Palestinian society, within Gaza, by UNRWA, which we pay for, British taxpayers pay for, are educated to hate Jews. That is what they are. That is the life that they are born into, that radicalization. And there are jihadists who think that if they kill Jews, they're going to go to heaven and they're going to get all the virgins. And like this, when we try and apply Western thought to this, and when we sort of go, well, why can't they just make peace like they did in Ireland? You're applying this kind of Western thought process, logic to where it isn't. This is a ideology. This is people raised within an ideology. Some of that ideology has been directed at hating Jews and wiping out all Jews in the world, and thinking that that's a great thing. That's part of the ideology. That's not all Islam, but that is part of Islam.
And I think that is what many on the far left don't understand, because they're not in that mindset. They haven't been understood how that mindset is, and they're applying the Western values towards their thinking, and they're supporting something that a lot of them don't really understand.
Absolutely. And if you watch the footage from October 7th, you can see and hear the glee, the delight that these jihadists took in murdering children, as like these two men here, of Jews, because they genuinely believed that this was what Allah wanted, and now they're going to go to heaven for it and have eternity of bliss. So we are talking about an ideology. This has nothing to do with race or racism. This is purely an ideology that celebrates death and wants to subjugate the world, the extreme parts of Islam. And we have to be able to address that. There are extreme parts of Judaism, extreme parts of Christianity, but it's how those elements are fed within Christian communities, Jewish communities.
They don't manifest in violence.
Well, this is exactly it. So, yeah, there is homophobia within all religion. It's supposedly banned in all religion, but then you choose to ignore certain parts of the text. You choose to embrace certain other parts of the text about, loving your fellow human being, and that's the way it is within all ideologies. You can find these parts of it, but the problem is within Islam is that there are too many people who are pushing an extremist manifestation of it.
I don't know. I really don't know where we go from here, frankly. I think, our governments need to have a real sit down and think about how they can protect Jewish people, because it's absurd that Jewish people are expected to have security and can't go and pray peacefully. And
I'd like to say something. It's, yes, but also how we can protect ourselves, our society, our Western liberal values. That's what we need to protect. There's a saying: first they come for the Saturday people, then they go for the Sunday people. If the Jews in this country leave, or the Jews in the West go and move to other places, that is only detrimental to the UK, and it will not stop there. All that will do is further embolden extremists to then come for and try and dominate the rest of society and change it to fit what they think the world should look like.
Because I've had people say that there's an extreme element of Islam that want to flood the country and then take over. Is that?
I don't know if that means
there's anything. Is that going down the rabbit hole? That's what people often.
Conspiracy
theory. I mean,
I've certainly seen Muslim men talking about this. I don't know if it's, you know, I'm not going to say it's like part of some grander plan or anything like that. It's just...
Some people argue that it is. For me, I think that's quite conspiratorial. I don't think everyone's that clever to all get in and go, let's do that.
There undoubtedly will be some Muslim people who think it would be a good idea if enough Muslims came to the UK and turned the UK into a sort of Islamic state of some kind. Of course, there will be some people who hold that view, but I don't think there's some greater, there is not some greater conspiracy going on there. I think what we all agree on is that whatever the religion is, when we look at, and it's the same with political ideology as well, when you get to the extremes, it always ends really, really badly. But the difference, as Josh says, is that when it comes to fundamental Islam, it manifests itself in this kind of horrific violence, often, as we've seen, anti-Semitic violence, but not just anti-Semitic. You know, think back to 9/11, which was about the ideology of the West and taking that on, right? And I think in some ways what we're seeing here is an example of that as well.
But we have to also be honest, just about the percentages of that extremism. In the, you know, there are going to be extremist Christians, extremist Jews, and maybe not extremist Buddhists, but maybe there are. But it's a percentage point.
Yeah, you see, and that is the thing, isn't it? It's more about, as you were saying, Josh, that there are extreme elements in every religion, but in some there are more extremism in certain parts.
Is that it's the legitimisation of murder in certain religions. It's the legitimisation of death.
All right, well, listen, we've got loads to bring you up to date. If you've just joined us, this is GBNews. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Let's bring you up to speed on all the devastating news that we have had from Australia. That devastating attack at Bondi Beach, where at least 12 people have been killed. That is following a mass shooting by 2 gunmen at the beach in Sydney, with 29 people currently in hospital. We do now know that one of those who is dead is a British-born rabbi, and footage from the scene shows a man wresting a pump-action shotgun from a gunman. We have now understood that the man wresting the shotgun off the gunman is a Muslim shopkeeper. Now, the attack happened as people celebrated the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. In a press conference, the New South Wales Police Premier, Chris Minns, said that one of the gunmen had been killed and another was in custody.
2 individuals began firing on a crowded group of families on Bondi Beach at Archer Park. This cowardly act of terrifying violence is shocking and painful to see and represents some of our worst fears about terrorism in Sydney. I very sadly need to report that as of now, there are at least 12 individuals that have been killed. One of the offenders has also been killed and one is in custody. This attack was designed to target Sydney's Jewish community on the first day of Hanukkah.
Australian police say they are currently investigating if there is a third offender. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says that the evil that was unleashed at Bondi Beach today is beyond comprehension.
This afternoon there has been a devastating terrorist incident at Bondi at the Hanukkah by the Sea celebration. This is a targeted attack on Jewish Australians on the first day of Hanukkah, which should be a day of joy, a celebration of faith. An act of evil anti-Semitism, terrorism that has struck the heart of our nation. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian, and every Australian tonight will be, like me, devastated.
50 gunshots were heard as hundreds of people fled the scene in Sydney at around 6:40 p.m. local time.
Ran onto the beach. I guess everyone ran onto the beach. It was pretty terrifying. And yeah, I eventually went back to see what was happening. A few people helped. We sort of helped a few old people get up and get out of there, but it was like there were lots of bodies on the floor.
There's been plenty of reaction here in the UK, with the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, saying it is deeply distressing news and described it as an appalling attack. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has announced that extra officers from the Metropolitan Police will be on the streets of London following the attack. And Reform UK leader Nigel Farage had this to say. Reform MP and Runcorn Helsby, Sarah Pochin, joins me now. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me. Such tragic news. I just want to get your reaction first, what has unfolded.
Well, of course, you know, my heartfelt sympathies go out to the Jewish community in Australia, but around the world, because they seem to be under such relentless attack at the moment, and it's building in such a frightening way, isn't it? You know, we're hearing it more and more. This is horrendous. I've never been to Bondi Beach, but I think of it as one of those iconic locations of fun and happiness. And I think today, or yesterday now, when this happened, it was, you know, a hot summer's day. It was school holidays. It was a family event. And again, my understanding of the event was that it's a festival of light, you know, and hope and promise. And then for this to happen, it was a clearly organised terrorist attack. There was more than one individual involved, at least 2, if not 3, I think, as being reported. The gunpowder involved looked, you know, incredibly sort of serious. And we've heard that there were 3 explosives ready to be detonated. So this is nothing short of a, you know, an organised terrorist attack on the Jewish community.
And in your constituency of Runcorn and Helsby, are you hearing of much anti-Semitism? Are the people coming to you? Are you getting much Jewish people, many Jewish people coming and talking about that?
Luckily, no. It isn't something that people do come and talk to me about in terms of my constituents, although I have met with the Jewish leaders in Manchester, and of course I see Jewish leaders, community leaders down in my role when I'm in Parliament. And as you know, Reform supports the Jewish community, but we support religious tolerance across the board. And this is horrendous. The pictures we're looking at is horrendous. But the fact is that religious intolerance is creeping into our society. I mean, this is nothing compared to what we're looking at now, but, you know, I even need to take security when I go to carol services in my constituency. You know, how have we got to this point, Nana, where, you know, a politician can't go to a carol service without taking their own security? Now, look, that's nothing's happened to me, thank goodness, and what we're seeing here is unfortunately at the other extreme of absolute terrorism on a religious group. But whatever happened to religious tolerance? Where is all this coming from?
You think, because Australia are very good with their immigration policies, but in this country we are somewhat lax. We have a situation of pretty much open borders, especially for those coming via the crossings on the Channel. Do you think that mass migration is playing a part in this anti-Semitism? And by that I mean mainly the illegal kind, because those who come here legally, although there's a lot of people who've come legally under the Conservatives, we vetted those people.
Look, we don't know, do we, the perpetrators of what's happened in Australia with this particular incident. We don't know their status. I don't think it's been reported. And I think it's very difficult and not appropriate to link possibly this type of attack with necessarily illegal migrants. I think around the world, certain countries are suffering now from a danger of losing their own culture. And that, as you know, is something that concerns some of us here in the United Kingdom. But clearly what we're looking at today, our hearts need to stay in sympathy with the Jewish community around the world. And I'm not sure this is a time yet for saying exactly, you know, what you know, we don't know enough about the perpetrators of this horrendous attack yet to start going down that road. But as I say, certainly in this country, we used to be, and I hope we still are, so tolerant. We are such a tolerant country of all religious differences. But when you start to see this happening and you start to realize that the Jewish community needs protection and security, and I've been listening to your reporting all day, and you hear about, them needing fences up around their events, their own security at their events. It's heartbreaking, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. That is what governments need to tackle. Governments need to tackle religious intolerance, religious extremism in whatever form it takes.
Well, what would Reform UK, if they were in power, do to do that?
Well, it's really difficult, isn't it, to know how to protect a community under such attack like the Jewish community are at the moment, because bar being at every event, providing them with security at every event. What do you do? Because you can never, with the best will in the world, I believe our security services here in the UK are some of the best in the world and are probably working endlessly around the clock, 24/7 to keep us safe. I'm sure we don't know about half of the attacks that they actually stop and prevent, and our thanks go out to our security services. Now, clearly in this case, I think I heard one of the reports today saying that one of these, I think the actual gunman that we saw was known to the security services, but again, we don't know enough about that to start any criticism of the security services. But certainly a reform government will put all the resource that we feel is necessary into supporting our security services to make sure that these sort of individuals are identified and detained and are not out on the streets to cause this sort of violence and terrorism.
And your thoughts on, because if I bring it back to the UK and I look at how this country is developing, I am concerned that, and I know the Jewish community are not surprised that this has happened in Australia, but they worry that this kind of thing will happen here in this country. We've already seen the attack in Manchester, and we know that there's a lot of anti-Semitism. Do you think that the pro-Palestine marches and all of those sort of things that we've seen over the last year or so have kind of contributed to a level of anti-Semitism that we haven't seen for quite some time? And how would Reform tackle that side of things? So marches, for example, would Reform UK ban pro-Palestine marches?
Look, I've said for a while that I believe that there is a two-tier justice in the United Kingdom. Why is it that a pro-Palestine march is allowed to go ahead, and yet the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans were not allowed to attend that football match? It's just not right. And I do believe that this government should be clamping down harder on any form of terrorism or terrorist links, and certainly marches that are clearly inciting religious hatred. I don't think that's too strong a word. And Reform, of course, would look at balancing this out. There is no way that one form of extremism is allowed, and yet normal football fans are not allowed to come and watch their team. It's unacceptable what's happening in this country.
It really is. And I just want to briefly ask you, because I watched you on another show and you were talking about puberty blockers. Can you just tell us where you are with all of that? Because I know that you were staunchly against the use on children.
Yeah, this is a massive issue, a campaign that I'm leading on very much at the moment with Rosie Duffield. It's a cross-party campaign which makes it incredibly strong. And we have been campaigning about this trial that children as young as 7 or 8 are going to be used as guinea pigs. I'd go as far as to say laboratory rats by this government, by the NHS, who's running this trial. Wes Streeting has approved and sanctioned this trial. And do you know what, Nana? We have no idea of the long-term effects of these powerful puberty blocking drugs on these children, whether it's brain damage, bone density problems, let alone the mental health problems, inability then to infertility, and the sexual organs in these children just will not grow and develop. And do you know what? It's chilling what Wes Streeting is sanctioning. So we are calling for this trial to be stopped. Do you know what? I was out walking my dogs this morning in the woods, and I saw families with children climbing trees, you know what, doing all the things that kids should be doing. No child as young as 7 should be questioning their sexuality. Who is putting these ideas into their heads? Children just need to be allowed to be children, and I will fight until the end to put a stop to this trial, because 226 children are going to be on this trial. I've asked for what their thoughts are on a lower age limit. There's not one. And I've asked for them to make sure they exclude, if we can't stop this trial, all vulnerable children, and that means children in care, children already diagnosed with ADHD or anxiety. And do you know what I was told by the clinicians that spoke to a group of MPs in Parliament 10 days ago? I was told that they actually wanted those children with already diagnosed problems in the trial so that they could compare how the drugs affected those. This is state-sponsored child abuse. It's spine-chilling. It's human experimentation on our children by the NHS, which should have at its forefront safeguarding, not clinical trials on vulnerable children. It's frightening, Nana, and there's a demonstration on Wednesday at 1 o'clock outside the Department for Health, and then the cross-party group will submit a letter into the Department of Health. We've already written to Wes Streeting asking him to stop this trial, but I can't tell you as a mum how utterly frightening it is. And also as a mum, I know that children have a horrible time going through puberty, but with love and support, they get through it the other end. But these children who are being brainwashed into taking puberty blocking drugs will have their lives altered forever. And even if they regret it, it's not reversible.
All right, Sarah Pochin, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for that. And of course, just to reiterate that Wes Streeting said he was uncomfortable with the notion of this trial, but he's leaving it to those who he feels knows better. And it was in the CAS review that the trial should potentially go ahead. So I suspect that's why it's happening. But that's Sarah Pochin. She's going to be fighting for that cause to ensure that that trial is stopped. Right, let's, if you just tuned in, it's 11 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. You have, of course, joined us, and we are in the midst of a horrendous incident that happened in Australia last night at 6:40. Let's speak to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who joins us to bring us the latest on it. Mark.
Well, it's now 4 a.m., 11 minutes past 4 a.m. in the morning, of course, in Sydney, Australia. But the emergency services, those investigators from New South Wales Police, have been relentless in their efforts to try to piece together the events from earlier in the evening, trying to determine, of course, primarily whether there is any wider threat out there. We heard from the New South Wales Police Commissioner a little earlier, who said that they were investigating the possibility of a third suspect, but I got the impression from the Commissioner that this was out of an abundance of caution, that there are reports, as there often are in these fast-paced marauding attacks like this, where people can sometimes get confused about the number of attackers. Certainly we know of those 2 attackers, but there were reports potentially of a third. Now that might be explained by the fact that one of those attackers who were on the bridge that you're looking at there, that small little bridge overlooking the area at the end of Bondi Beach where the Hanukkah celebrations were just beginning, and that's where the gunman opened fire from. At one point, one of the attackers walked down from the bridge, took cover behind a palm tree and used that as a location a bit nearer to where people were to open fire. And you can see these images here actually of where that attacker actually got subdued, the weapon taken from him, that pump-action shotgun, by a local greengrocer, a man by the name of Ahmed El Ahmed, showed incredible bravery as he managed to fight off the attacker, take his weapon and place it up against the palm tree for the authorities to arrive, and then that throwing a stone actually at the attacker, who headed back onto the bridge with his fellow terrorist at that point. And it might be that kind of scenario that leads people to think there were three attackers in different locations. It was one, of course, changing location briefly. We can bring you the name actually of one of the suspects now, 24-year-old Naveed Akram. We're told that he is originally from Pakistan. You can see him on that bridge, as we were talking about earlier. He had a long-barreled weapon with a telescopic sight on it that he was using to pick off people more accurately from distance, and he was firing for a very long time indeed before he was eventually subdued, shot by the officers, armed officers from New South Wales Police. His driving licence showed that he is a resident of Bonnyrigg, a suburb of Sydney, and in the minutes and hours that followed, a very big police operation has been taking place in that Bonnyrigg area with police, forensic teams, armed units, as they raided the property. And they're trying to gather, as I say, as much information as possible, because they want to know as quickly as possible how this attack was planned, whether there are other individuals out there that at the very least might have had some knowledge of it, but more worryingly, might actually be planning something similar themselves. That's always the case with these terrorist attacks when they unfold. The authorities, as well as dealing with the aftermath of the attack, delve as quickly as they can into the background of those that have been arrested to try to determine whether there is a wider threat. They've not said as yet that there isn't a wider threat. Certainly locally it's being contained, but we just don't know how the tentacles of this potential plot, how far those tentacles lead. We can bring you some really tragic news as well that was confirmed to us in the last hour and a bit, and that is the death of one of the 11 innocent people who were shot dead, 12 in total, including the gunman, but 11 innocent people were shot dead, and among them a British-born rabbi. That rabbi is Rabbi Eli Schlanger, who was 41 years old. He was the father of 5 young children. In fact, a young son just born in the last couple of months. Leaves behind those young children and his devastated wife. Rabbi Schlanger, we're told, was born in northwest London. He moved with his family as a child to New York. Then as an adult married an Australian and moved down to Australia to build his life there. Interestingly, Rabbi Schlanger spoke out in the wake of the deadly attack at the Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester in October, when that Islamist attacker went on his deadly rampage, crashing his car into the front gates of the synagogue before then stabbing members of that synagogue. And of course, 2 people died, several were injured in those terrible events. Well, Rabbi Schlanger told Australian television that his great uncle Leslie had been the rabbi of the synagogue for more than 35 years. He'd been the rabbi of the Heaton Park synagogue, the scene of that other terrorist attack, for 35 years. And he was asked by the reporter on Australian television whether he was worried about a similar attack happening in Australia. And he replied that he put his full trust in Hashem, that nothing will happen. And of course, we know now the news, the confirmation that very sadly, Rabbi Schlanger was one of the 11 innocent people who were shot dead by these two terrorists. And sadly, the authorities in Sydney making the public or preparing the public for the potential for that death toll to rise, because we know that 29 people, including that brave greengrocer who tackled one of the terrorists, is in hospital. All are described as having serious injuries, some of them critically ill. So the authorities in Sydney just preparing the population for the potential that they may be waking up in 2 or 3 hours' time to the news of a higher death toll.
Mark White, thank you very much. That's Mark White reporting. Now, joining me now, former Australian MP Tim Smith, who's also an advisor to the Deputy Foreign Minister Sharon Haskell in the Israeli government. So first, Tim, really awful incident happened in Australia last night.
Absolutely horrific. 11 innocent Jewish Australians gunned down at Bondi Beach. I've been to that beach 100 times. I'm actually from Melbourne, but everyone's been to Bondi Beach. I've been to that park. It's an iconic, national symbol, and it's now the site of the worst massacre, the worst mass shooting event in Australia in 30 years. But unlike the last mass shooting in Australia, which was indiscriminate, tragic, indiscriminate, and aimed at everyone at a historic site in Tasmania called Port Arthur, this one was specifically aimed at Jewish Australians. There's only 120,000 Jews in Australia. It's very small. Very similar to the UK, where there's only 300,000 Jews in Britain out of a population of 70 million, 120,000 in Australia out of a population of 26 million. So the proportions are roughly similar. And they were shot because they were Jews. They were killed because they were Jews. How many times in the last 2 years have people just been killed because they were Jews? How many times? October 7, 1,200 people. Anti-Semitism has exploded in Australia since October 7. A rise of 700% in 2 and a bit years. And it all comes from this one moment. 2 days after the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, October 7, October 9, 2023, a baying mob stood on the steps of the Sydney Opera House, that iconic Australian building, and shouted, "Gas the Jews, F the Jews." And nothing happened to these people. Not a single criminal charge was laid. Now, if that's not a hate crime, I'll go he. So the simple fact is this: there were no consequences for these people, and anti-Semitism has exploded since that point. And 2 years on, we have a mass casualty event where people were shot and killed by simply being Jewish. I had a very good friend who was injured. He got shot in the head. Arsen Ostrowski, a great bloke, an Israeli-Australian. He's appeared on this channel many times. He's a human rights lawyer. He moved back to Australia to head up the Australia-Israel Jewish Affairs Council to combat anti-Semitism only 2 weeks ago. So he survives Israel, a war zone, gets off the plane, goes to celebrate Hanukkah with his wife and kids at Bondi and gets shot in the head. What's happened to my country? Australia, you have a serious problem. And my message to the Australian government is, in some respects, you've caused this by virtue of the fact that your language has been so anti-Israel for so long, and that you decided to recognise a Palestinian state before all the Israeli hostages were released from Hamas. that was morally indefensible, wrong, and has given a green light for this sort of behaviour, this sort of terror on the streets of Sydney. I'm disgusted.
I'm sorry to hear about your friend. That's really awful. I can almost hear in my mind people saying, but what about Gaza and all these 60,000 children, or how many thousand, I'm not really sure, but a lot of people have died. And people are saying, but what about the children in Gaza, which is what the reverse argument is, really.
I don't think it's got anything to do with... Obviously, you can argue that October 7 was a catalyst, and I've made that point, and it clearly was, because anti-Semitism has gone up 700% in New South Wales since October 7.
But if October 7th was a catalyst, some people might say that what happened in Gaza is now a catalyst for people behaving as they are.
But Australia has imported a group of people that hate Jews. It didn't matter. October 7, let's say October 7 didn't happen. These people always hated Jews. And Australia has failed to integrate, these people have failed to integrate into the mainstream of Australian society appropriately. I mean, let's be really blunt about this. Let's say a bunch of white supremacists stood on the steps of the Sydney Opera House and shouted...
Let's not... Yeah, I get it.
Something not very nice about other groups of people. What would the response have been by Australian authorities? People would have been arrested, and a clear message would have been sent to the community that that sort of behaviour is entirely unacceptable and there will be criminal consequences for it. But there was no consequence for that behaviour, and yet anti-Semitism has grown out of control. And as we saw during the 1930s, words lead to deeds that lead to Kristallnacht, that lead to ghettos, that lead to the camps. This is how this starts.
But why has Australia let it go out of control? The UK, same thing here, by the way, I'm not saying...
I think the Australian Labor Party has some significant internal problems, particularly in Western Sydney, with a large Muslim cohort within its ranks, and also marginal seat, well, until the last election, which I won't bore you with the details, where the Conservative side of politics was badly beaten. But up until that point, there were a number of marginal seats in Western Sydney that has a large Muslim vote, and I think the Labor Party didn't want to upset various elements in the community.
So they've allowed it to fester, and now it's festered, and then we have actions like this.
This is what happens when you put political expediency over doing the right thing, I think.
But Australia's very good with its immigration policy, so whilst you may have a small cohort of people who behave like that, and I think overall they are a minority of people, an extreme, they're extremists, they are the minority. But Australia are very good at, vetting who they allow in the country. Maybe these, we don't know whether they were born in Australia, these...
Look, I don't know enough about these people yet to be able to comment on it, but I have read reports, particularly over the last 2 years, that Australia has let in a number of people from the Middle East without appropriate vetting, and that's caused quite a lot of controversy in Australia and a great deal of concern.
Do you think that the UK needs to be very concerned about our border policies and how we've allowed so many unvetted people to come into this country and then let them roam our streets?
I think this is a national security issue, yes I do. And I think people have got to be... I think the government of the day has an obligation to the mainstream of society to ensure that those that they are letting in, firstly, will conform and integrate appropriately into society, make a contribution to it, and don't have the capacity to turn into crime.
And that's not to say that,
That's not to say that we need immigration, we need controlled, orderly immigration, where people make a contribution. I mean, heavens above, I'm an immigrant to the United Kingdom.
I am too.
But if we're going to talk about immigration, living in the UK is a privilege, not a right. And I think people need to remember that.
And just to say, obviously, we have our own homegrown terrorists in this country who were born here and didn't come from anywhere else but here. And that's the same in Australia. And again, we don't know.
And we don't know
all the details.
I don't know anything about these people. All I know is that they have gone down to Bondi Beach, killed 11 Jews and injured a further 30.
It's just terrible. It's shocking. And what do you think will happen now in Australia? Do you think that they may change course, be a bit stricter in some sense, or force some sort of assimilation with... I mean, I just don't know. What do you think? What will Australia do now after this?
It's a very good question. I mean, after the Port Arthur massacre in 1996, you saw some of the toughest gun laws in the world brought into Australia. So essentially, automatic, semi-automatic handguns were all made illegal in Australia by John Howard, the former great Liberal Prime Minister of Australia. And Liberal in Australia means Conservative, by the way.
Okay.
So there's not much more you can do in terms of regulating gun ownership in Australia. So there will be a serious discussion as to when it becomes apparent as to who these people are, whether they were migrants or not, or what their backgrounds are. I think there's going to be a serious conversation about the type, manner and mix of immigration to Australia, and also what the government must do to stamp out anti-Semitism. I mean, that's, you know, the Jewish community in Australia have been saying for 2 years that we're vulnerable, and the government has done nothing.
And what about, and you guys, you're not in the ECHR at all. I mean, this is a great thing for you. We're stuck in it. When Australia kind of looks on the United Kingdom, what advice do you think they would give us?
Well, I mean, I'm very familiar with Australian analogies within the immigration debate in the UK. And, you know, Tony Abbott stopped the boats in 2013 when he was elected Prime Minister. He stopped the boats within 6 months.
You've got very hostile seas there.
But there are some very big differences between the UK and Australia. The Timor Sea's hundreds of kilometres between the coast of Western Australia and Indonesia. The Channel's, I think, 23 miles at its...
21, I think.
21 miles at its narrowest point. It's not entirely feasible to operate what we call Operation Sovereign Borders in the UK. I think there are some things that the British government should try. Boat turnbacks, when safe to do so, did work in the Australian example. But you have to have a deterrent for illegal migration. Have to. And I don't want to conflate these two issues, this terrible terror attack in Australia and illegal migration, because let's be very clear, we don't know the background. We do not know the background of these people at all. But whilst you're asking, there has to be a deterrent for, as I said before, living and working in the United Kingdom is a privilege, not a right. You don't just turn up willy-nilly and expect a publicly funded hotel room and the red carpet rolled out for you. For those of us who come the legal way, it costs a fortune, and you're very mindful of the fact that the Home Office and Border Force will come down on you like a ton of bricks if you breach the conditions of your visa. That clearly doesn't apply to everyone, and this is one of the issues I've got with the UK. There seems to be certain rules for certain people and certain rules for other people.
It's a very messy system, and you are right. We're not conflating the two, but it's just a question I wanted to ask you, seeing as you have experience in that area, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers and listeners would be very concerned. Danny Kelly has a question for you.
Tim, you mentioned the turnarounds. Now, people who say you should just turn around the boats, we've got the ECHR to deal with, but also people will say, well, the lads on the dinghies are just got to throw themselves in the drink in the channel. Now, Nana touched on hostile waters. Now, with the turnarounds, the boats were different, the distances were greater, but you're not inclined to throw yourself in the ocean because it's infested with sharks.
Well, yeah, and the trip back to Indonesia is a lot further than it is to France. And what the Royal Australian Navy did was essentially disembarked the illegal immigrants from their boat, put them in unsinkable life rafts, and towed them back to Indonesian waters.
And that would be, no one was going to throw themselves in the drink.
And that worked.
But no one, because critics of the turnaround say, well, they're just going to throw themselves in the channel.
You're not suggesting we put sharks in the channel? Danny Kelly.
I'm not suggesting we move sharks into the... No, but that's the point that I always thought. The big difference was that you're not going to throw yourself in the ocean in between Indonesia and Australia because of the hostility of the waters.
And one of the reasons why the Labor Party lost the 2013 election in Australia was because they came to power in 2007 and reversed all of John Howard's very strong border measures. Yeah. And over that period, about 1,200 people drowned from memory trying to get from Indonesia to Australia. It was a very, very tragic period where boats were washing up on Christmas Island, which is an Australian territory in the middle of the Timor Sea, and it was awful. And the reason why the Australian government, and mind you, the Labor Party this time around has not changed any of Tony Abbott's policies when it comes to migration, because they worked and it stopped people drowning at sea. And that's what sometimes you've got to remember when you're making policy on issues as sensitive as migration, illegal immigrants and borders, is that sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind, which is you need a very strong deterrent to dissuade people, often desperate people, but not necessarily refugees, from getting in a leaky boat and trying to get to Australia. And in this case, obviously, on the evidence I've seen, a lot of the people that are coming to the UK from Europe are not refugees. They're economic migrants who have left a very safe country, namely France, to get to the UK. And I think that whether it's Rwanda or some other scheme that would ensure that these people never step foot or never could live in the United Kingdom, I think that's where the UK has to head.
All right, well, let's bring it back to the incident, though, in Australia that happened last night. And did you have a question?
Yeah, well, I wondered, more broadly for British politics, whether you know, what you're just taking it slightly away from this incident for a minute, what would your advice be for a government that's basically floundering in every respect? I think we're beyond the point at which it's a reset. Like, what should Keir Starmer do tomorrow morning, I suppose, to get back on track?
Well, so for what it's worth, for full disclosure, I am a Conservative, so I'm not going to provide gratuitous advice to the Labor Party. But, I mean, they're just so bad. Probably I'd resign, give someone else a go, because they can't be any worse than he is.
Oh, God, he's terrible.
Do you think it's a personnel thing?
Well...
By which I mean, if you change the leader, do you think that would make it?
Probably not. But they couldn't be any worse.
There's your answer.
Anyway, that's my 2 pence.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, if you just tuned in, welcome on board. This is GB News. We are, of course, covering the events that happened in Australia last night, where 12 people were tragically killed, 30 are currently in hospital, and we'll keep bringing you all of the updates. In the studio, joining me, former Australian MP Tim Smith, who also worked with the Israeli government and was an advisor to he is an advisor to the Deputy Foreign Minister Sharon Haskell. I want to ask you, Tim, then, what do you think that Israelis will be making of what happened in Australia?
Well, Israel always regarded Australia as a very, very safe country for Jews. I mean, countless, tens of thousands of Jews came to Australia after World War II and were welcomed and made very happy homes in Australia and thrived and have made a wonderful contribution to Australia. So it is inconceivable to many of the older generations in the Jewish community that this sort of anti-Semitism is now rife in Australia. So there's a lot of shock in the Jewish community in Australia, and that obviously feeds back into Israel because there's obviously a lot of family connections between the Jewish community in Australia and Israel. So there will be a sense of, I suppose, a sense of shock, but not altogether unsurprising, given what we've seen since October 7th.
Is there a safe country then for Jewish people? Because it feels as though all around the world, we've seen in America, there was the pro-Palestine protests on campuses all over. I mean, Donald Trump has changed things, which I think is a good thing. But there are so many countries, and mainly in the Western world. So where do you think is the safest place now for Jewish people? A lot of them here in the UK will be very worried.
Well, I think Israel is a very safe place.
Yeah.
I must tell you, I feel very safe in Tel Aviv. I feel much safer in Tel Aviv than I do in certain parts of London, I can assure you.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's not a flippant comment. That's 100% true.
I mean, Israel has really set itself up. It's got the Iron Dome.
Israel
really protects its people.
Israel, Tel Aviv in particular, is a wonderfully safe place, and it has a wonderful vibe to it. And, I would hate to see... I mean, the idea that the Jewish community is not safe in the UK or Australia, I think, is just horrific. But there was the Manchester synagogue attack earlier this year on Yom Kippur. You fast forward to Hanukkah and there's a terrorist shooting in Sydney, Australia. I mean, what the hell is going wrong? This is outrageous, and we shouldn't tolerate it.
On GB News early this morning, Tim, there was an Australian politician who last week put a burqa on to make a statement in Parliament. And she was being interviewed by GB News. And she may have a fringe opinion, but I wonder about how you feel about this opinion, about deportation. I can't remember, I'm paraphrasing rather clumsily, but she basically said, you know, if people can't assimilate into Australian life, then we need to get them out of the country. And that's a clumsy paraphrase. Is that going to become more favourable and popular, that opinion?
You can only assume so after incidents like this. I mean, the Jewish community aren't committing terror attacks.
No.
I mean, I don't want to go any further down that path, but let's just be very clear about this.
Because I've heard that, again, uttered by people in this country. People on the fringe of politics, you know, mostly on social media. I'm not on social media, but I pick it up in the papers and things like this. But that's something that people are talking about. You know, if you're a Jew and you're not safe in this country, or if you're a Christian and you're not safe in this country, then the people who are making you unsafe shouldn't be here.
But this is what I was talking about earlier, Danny, when I say I think we need to be really careful when it comes to knee-jerk reactions in these cases. And I think the people who, well, I think more popular than I would like, and I think that people like, I think that's Pauline Hanson who you're talking about, and people like her who are on the fringes of politics. I think we should keep them there, because that is a path, to use Tim's term, that I would not want to go down.
She's an MP though, Tim, yeah?
She's a senator, yes.
What's the difference between a senator and an MP?
So in Australia, we have an elected upper house. So it's the equivalent of the House of Lords. It's elected.
OK.
I would strongly advise you never to do that, by the way.
What, to become a senator?
Have an elected second chamber.
Well, I'm with you on that. I think it's good that the House of Lords is unelected. I agree. Can't imagine how...
No, never go down the path we went down. It's a very bad idea.
Well, if you just joined us, this is at GB News. Just to bring you up to date, New South Wales police say that 11 people have been killed in a shooting at Bondi Beach. They were targeting the Jewish community, with 29 people taken to hospital. We now know that a British-born rabbi, El Schlanger, was among those killed in the attack, and so we now have a name for him. All right, well, listen, I've got to say thank you very much to Tim Smith. He's a former Australian MP and an advisor to the Deputy Foreign Minister, Sharon Haskell, for joining us here. But now let's go to the co-chair of Northwest Friends of Israel, Rafi Bloom, who was near the Manchester synagogue attack, and he joins us now. Rafi, a lot of people are saying they're not surprised that an attack of this nature has happened.
Absolutely. The Australian jury has faced the same tsunami of Jew hatred that Jews in the UK have faced for the last 2 years. Arson attacks on communal organisations, calls to gas the Jews in the Sydney Opera House, physical attacks, campuses being overrun with Jew hatred, and of course the weekly marches that we see here. They've had exactly the same there, with the chants and demands to globalise the Intifada, and what happened in Heaton Park when the Intifada was globalised in Manchester happened in Sydney today, last night, when the Intifada was globalised with tragic consequences. And yet again, the similarities continue, because much as we've had inaction from our political leadership, despite the warnings that we've been screaming about for 2 years, the same is true in Australia, with the same tragic consequences.
And so this is the thing, a lot of Jewish people are saying they're just not surprised at all. They knew this was coming. Talk to me from your own personal experience. What is it like being Jewish now in the UK?
Look, I'm very much a believer that I am not a Jew with trembling knees. We're proud British Jews, we're proud Mancunian Jews, as I said after the Yom Kippur attack, and will continue to say, you know, we've contributed as Mancunians to making Manchester the great city it is for almost 200 years. We're not going anywhere. We're going to fight for our right to stay in this country as proud British Jews. But make no mistake, the community is afraid. The community is distressed. And we have great words from politicians saying that they're going to increase our physical security after an event like this, and they're going to make sure that we can go to our communal events feeling safe. But really, that's dealing with the acute nature of the issue, not the chronic nature. Until our politicians deal with the Islamic extremism that we are seeing week in, week out, stirred by imams in mosques up and down this country, and there are hundreds of videos of sermons of imams sharing the most vile Jew hatred, until politicians, and our Prime Minister specifically, actually says the words Islamic extremism, we will never get to fix this problem, and Jews will continue to be attacked and sadly murdered on our streets.
You're talking about fixing the problem, and I'd love to see it fixed, but most people I ask haven't really got any idea how we can go about it, because this, as I understand, is just deep-rooted hatred of Jewish people. It's an extreme Islam view. It's extremism. It's not the general view of the Muslim community, so it'd be very unfair to tarnish them, and in particular, the shopkeepers we hear who wrestled the gunman to the ground was Muslim. So, you know, it is important to make sure that we emphasise that. But how would you see this problem? How would you advise the government to try and fix this problem in this country?
Well, I'd answer that question in two parts, if I may. Firstly, as you all know, I used the word Islamic extremism, and you're absolutely right that that is what we need to tackle, the extremists who weaponize Islam in this vile and dangerous manner. But it needs to be challenged, and it needs to be challenged by our politicians. As an example, in Greater Manchester, I also sit as a management board member of the Jewish Representative Council of Greater Manchester, the organisation that represents the community to the outside world. And we have tried now for 2 years to engage with the organisations, the counterparts of ourselves in the Greater Manchester Muslim community. And they have either only agreed to meet with us in secret and refused to meet with us in public because they do not want to engage with Zionists. Now, as you well know, the vast majority of Jewish people in this country are Zionists. It means we believe in the right of Israel to exist. If they're refusing to engage with the Jewish community because of our support for and love of the only Jewish state in the world, the nation state of the Jewish people, the state of Israel, then we are never going to tackle this problem and be able to talk to each other respectfully, understand each other's differences, listen to each other with empathy. But we've extended the hand of friendship multiple times, and it has been turned down time after time after time. The second thing I would say is that the government promised us after the Yom Kippur attack at Heaton Park that they would take swift action to deal with many of these issues. What we've received from the government, to use a festive analogy, is many baubles, but no tree to hang them on. And why is that now, almost 2 months later?
Yeah, I mean, I do hear you. It's do you think that, and I'm bringing it back to the UK because I know that a lot of Jewish people are concerned now that we'll see more attacks like that, and of course these things have happened in different countries around the world, so it is I think it's an international problem here, you know, that we have, and it's not just Australia, because October the 11th was, of course, in Israel, and we've had this attack now in Australia, and we've had an attack in Manchester as well in the UK. As you said, you were near the synagogue when that happened. Talk to me about that day.
I was on my way to synagogue. I had a phone call to say that there'd been a terrorist attack. Don't go there. It's my synagogue. The rabbi is a good friend of mine. I knew many people who were in the synagogue at the time. But again, as I said, we knew this was coming. I didn't expect it to be at my synagogue in my city. But as a Jewish community, we knew it was going to happen. Much like I am sure the Australian Jewish community knew that was going to happen. And you know, the Jewish community, we're a people and a religion, and the Jewish community is very, very close, very connected. One of the survivors of today, somebody whose bullet grazed his head, his last message to me was after Yom Kippur to see if I was okay. The rabbi who was murdered, his great uncle was the rabbi of the Heaton Park synagogue immediately before Rabbi Walker took up his position. So as a community, you know, we're incredibly connected and close. And the other thing to say as well is that everybody talks about the conflict in the Middle East being imported onto our streets, and it's all about Israel and the Palestinians. But just look at what October the 7th was. October the 7th was targeting Jewish people in Israel, mostly on a festival, the festival of Simchat Torah. In Manchester, they targeted the Jewish community as they worshipped at the Jewish festival of Yom Kippur. Today, they've targeted the Australian Jewish community at the festival of Hanukkah. This isn't about Zionism in Israel. This is about Jew hatred. And they knew, these terrorists knew, Hanukkah, of all the festivals that we celebrate, is the one that's most geared towards children. we light candles, we give presents, we play games. My grandchildren are coming here in 10 minutes to light the first night of Hanukkah candles with me in my house. They knew, these terrorists knew, they were targeting Jews. They make no distinction between Zionism and Jews, much like the rejection that we've received in Manchester because we are Zionists. To these evil people, Jews are all the same. And unless our political leaders and society as a whole, it's a moral failure of the world. But, I'm sitting here in Manchester, you're in London. It's a moral failure of the UK that Jewish people in this country in 2025 still have to send their children to school behind big fences with security guards. We have to go to synagogue behind big fences and security guards. We have to watch ourselves. We have to report ourselves. We have to have our own organization that supplements the police in protecting us, the amazing Community Security Trust. Why is that normal? Why is that accepted as normal? Why are we the only faith community in this country that has to have this protection? Surely we need to switch the focus to those who are trying to attack us, to kill us, who have murdered us, and say, why can't the government get to grips with that? Why can't these marches every week that scream to globalise the Intifada and chant from the river to the sea? Finally, the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister, the police, ban them. Because if you chant globalise the Intifada for over 2 years, every week, week in, week out, somebody is going to do it. They did it here at Heaton Park on Yom Kippur. They've done it in Sydney today, and they will do it again somewhere else unless our leaders have the moral bravery to tackle the extremism and incitement that is going on within the Muslim community. Not completely, I agree with you, but in a large part of it, and say enough is enough.
Do you think that anti-Semitism has kind of been normalised then in the UK?
Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. We see it in our NHS. We see, I know for a fact that there are visibly Jewish women, so women that you would recognise as being Jewish, taking helpers, doulas, whatever you want to call them, into maternity wards in NHS hospitals when they're having babies because they are petrified that something will happen to their baby by pro-Palestinian medics who we know and we've experienced in Manchester before have mistreated Jewish patients simply because they're Jewish. We see it on our university campuses where our students are intimidated, where they can't show support for Israel. We're a democracy. People should be allowed to show support for another democratic nation and ally of the UK. We've seen that time and time again. We've seen physical attacks. We've seen vandalism. Absolutely, this has become normalised. Jewish people are fearful. Many people are questioning whether we have a future here, whether our children and our grandchildren have a future here. How can that be normal? We're proud British Jews. And as I said, we're given very nice words and we're given lots of physical security, which costs lots of money. But unless you tackle the root causes of these issues, this will happen time and time again, and it becomes ever more normalised.
Well, Wes Streeting has promised that he will do something about the anti-Semitism in the NHS, so he's completely acknowledged that it exists. Because I can remember when I was speaking to Uri Geller and he spoke about this, that a lot of people were saying, oh, no, you can't. But the following day, the piece came out in the Telegraph about anti-Semitism in the NHS, which is a shocking indictment of our health service, really. You would never expect that. Now, do you think, and people have talked about multiculturalism, and obviously we don't want to conflate it with immigration and all that kind of thing, but do you think that in this country, the fact that we have silos of different cultures that don't really blend has been a problem and has exacerbated the isolation of the Jewish community?
Well, as I said, I can only talk from experience, and for the last 2 years, we have continuously extended the hand of friendship to the Muslim community of Greater Manchester to say, come and talk to us, engage with us publicly. Let's have the difficult conversations. Let's agree to disagree, but let's not import a conflict on the other side of the world onto our streets, because we see and we know that every time there's a conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas or the Palestinians, anti-Semitism, Jew hatred spikes in the UK. But they won't engage with us. They won't engage with us publicly, and the moderate members of the community who do are immediately slapped down by the extremists in their community, so much so that they don't want to put their head above the parapet. You know, the Jewish Representative Council has tried to engage with the Council of Mosques of Greater Manchester, and we've been knocked back several times. They just won't come and talk to us. Now, we're entitled to support the people of Israel. We might not always agree with everything the government of the state of Israel does, but we're allowed to support Israel's right to exist. That's what a Zionist is. Many of us have family members who live there. But that should not be a bar or a barrier for them coming to talk to us. But it is, because we are seen as Zionists, and that is something that is almost like you say by spitting out of the side of your mouth. So we need to learn how to have these difficult conversations. We need to learn to hear each other, to empathize with each other, to understand their pain. They should understand our pain. But we live 2,500, 3,000 miles away from the Middle East. We again extend the hand of friendship, but many of us in the community feel now it's a futile effort because we've tried and tried and we've just been rejected.
So that is the Muslim Council you're saying, where you are. Well, you know, perhaps, obviously they're not here to defend themselves, so we don't know their side of the story. But perhaps that is the answer, really, or part of the answer, that we need more integration with the two communities and more talking between the two communities to understand each other a bit better. And perhaps, as you say, not import foreign wars, which are, I mean, they're foreign because they're in other countries, even though they may kind of relate to you in some respect, they're not actually here and you're not physically part of that. So perhaps that is part of the answer. Maybe that's what we need to be doing. Rafi, thank you so much for talking to me. I just wanted to ask you one final question, just to find out, you say that you've had to have protection and security. How long has that been going on for?
Oh, decades and decades. You know, when I went to school, we had it. My children had it. My grandchildren have it. You know, after October the 7th, my 4-year-old grandson, who was 4 at the time, had to, in his Jewish day school, had to undergo drills to learn how to get under a desk in the event of a bomb attack. He's a 4-year-old child in a state school in Greater Manchester. Wow. This has been going on for a long, long time, and it's, you know, we take it for granted. We know we have to do security shifts as volunteers. We know that we have paid security on gates. We know that we have an organisation dedicated to our security. We know that the police are determined to protect us. But why are we living behind gates when we want to practice our faith in Great Britain in 2025? Why is the only Jewish community? You don't see that at churches. You don't see that at mosques. You don't see that at Hindu temples. It's only the Jewish community that have to live with these stringent security measures. So much so that people are saying now, you know, I'm worried about going to a public Hanukkah menorah lighting because I'm worried something might happen. It's unacceptable in Britain in 2025. The government can tackle it, not by throwing money at protecting us, but by dealing with the root causes of those people who seek to harm us.
Absolutely.
For some reason, there's an unwillingness to do that in the manner that is required.
All right, Rafi Bloom, thank you very much. He's the co-chair of the North West Friends of Israel. All right, well, I've got to say thank you so much for joining me. I've got to say thank you to Danny Kelly, who will be leaving us, but I will be back after the break. We'll continue this. Andy Williams will stay with me also, and we'll bring you all the latest on that breaking news.
It's the greatest cash prize of the Great British Giveaway so far. A simply stunning £85,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like, making 2026 your greatest year to date. That could get you that brand new car, extend and improve your home, take you away on that bucket list holiday, or just give you some peace of mind over the coming months. For another chance to win £85,000 cash, text cash to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB18 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 30th of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk then?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
In fact, has Trump made a good start? No.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints.
How many fingers have I got up?
About 10. So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You want to know what's really going on in the corridors of power? Labour don't know what to do with you half the time, and that makes you quite lethal in the chamber. Get behind the headlines with Chopper's Political Podcast. Join me, Christopher Hope, as I sit down with the great and the good of British politics. We'll see where this ruling takes us. These are the stories shaping our nation. Chopper's Political Podcast, available now on all platforms. Listen in and stay ahead.
Good evening, it is 6 o'clock and welcome to a Akua special programme as we continue our coverage of the terrible terrorist attack in Bondi Beach, Australia. Now, we'll be bringing you all of the latest news, but first, let's get your latest news headlines with Bethany Elsey.
Good evening. Your top stories at 6 o'clock. At least 12 people have died, including a British-born rabbi, and dozens more injured after a terror attack at Bondi Beach in Australia. 2 gunmen fired towards a crowd, including families, in what police have called a target attack on Sydney's Jewish community. 29 people have been taken to hospital. One of the gunmen has been killed and the other is in a critical condition. The loss of life, though, could have been far greater were it not for the actions of a brave bystander who tackled one of the gunmen and disarmed him. Eyewitnesses have described the incident as terrifying.
I just heard what sounded like fireworks going off, and it was just multiple going off. So I sort of opened the blinds to see what was going on, and I just saw an older lady get shot, and she was on the floor. Saw an older guy get shot, very badly injured on the left-hand side, and I just saw a bunch of people screaming, run towards me. I didn't know what was going on.
It's kind of like, I don't know, fish in a barrel. Like, the guy had I think of what I've been told, he had an automatic rifle, big gun, standing on the bridge, and just target practice.
The shooting took place in Archer Park during an event to celebrate the first day of the Jewish holy festival of Hanukkah. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has described it as an act of evil anti-Semitism.
This is a targeted attack on Jewish Australians on the first day of Hanukkah, which should be a day of joy, a celebration of faith. An act of evil anti-Semitism, terrorism, that has struck the heart of our nation. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian, and every Australian tonight will be, like me, devastated.
Leaders around the world have also condemned the terror attack. Among them, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has described it as sickening, and King Charles says he's appalled and saddened. A menorah has been lit in Trafalgar Square in central London to mark the first day of Hanukkah. The chief rabbi said the victims of what he described as an unspeakable atrocity are in their hearts and prayers. Police forces across the UK say there'll be an increased officer presence among Jewish communities. In other news, a person of interest has been detained in connection with a mass shooting in the US, which killed 2 people and injured 9 others. The gunman opened fire in a building at Brown University in Rhode Island while exams were taking place. The Ivy League College in Providence was placed under lockdown as more than 400 police officers searched for the attacker. Those injured are in a critical but stable condition. And delegations from the US and Ukraine have arrived in Germany to discuss a proposed peace plan to end the war with Russia. Donald Trump's special envoy is meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky and European leaders ahead of a summit in Berlin tomorrow. Steve Witkoff has been leading US attempts to mediate between Ukraine and Russia. The first draft of the peace agreement has been criticised for favouring the Kremlin's demands, including putting pressure on Kyiv to make territorial concessions. Those are the latest. Let's get back to Nana.
Tune in to GB News Radio wherever you are. Online, on DAB digital radio, on TuneIn, on Radio Player, on Nation Player and on your smart speaker. Just say, play GB News.
Good evening. It is 3 minutes past 6 o'clock. Let's get straight now to our GB News Home Security Editor, Mark White, who joins us now to give us the latest on that terror attack in Australia. Mark.
Well, police still piecing together the exact circumstances of the attack that unfolded just before 7 o'clock in the evening in Sydney, when real panic broke out. We want to show you some of the images, actually give you an indication of what happened at about 6:45 in the evening when these shots rang out. First images we can bring you are of Bondi Beach itself, with so many people, hundreds of people that were on that beach just running, trying to get away from the areas. Others, running from the water itself. Others just getting off the beach. I mean, the trouble was that they were hearing shots ringing out. Some of them just didn't know where the shots were coming from. But and indeed, some were running towards the area where the shots were actually emanating from. So a really confusing picture on this world-famous beach. Many people, of course, that have been to Sydney will have been to Bondi Beach. It's one of the go-to destinations for tourists and Australians alike. And then further away from the beach, we can show you the next video sequence, again shot by a member of the public, with people just running, trying to get on buses, actually. A real scene of panic there. You can absolutely understand why, because as these images were playing there, the shots were still ringing out from the gunmen themselves that were on a nearby bridge, firing long-barreled weapons down towards the crowds of people, specifically targeting those that were at that Hanukkah candle lighting ceremony to mark the beginning of this 8-day festival of light. So these people that are running are just in that area where the festivities were beginning and just desperate to get out of the area. Another video we can show you that is quite graphic. We've had to blur quite a lot of the images, shows the immediate aftermath with, again, police responding, running to try to do what they can for those that have been caught up in this. You can see there a pump-action shotgun lying down beside that palm tree that was used by one of the attackers to get up close and to shoot as many people clearly as they could. And we know, of course, that many people have been injured, 29 injured, all described as having been seriously injured, on top of 11 people, innocent members of the public, who were shot dead. One of the gunmen also shot dead by police. And that pump-action shotgun you were looking at there, we can show you the moment that that weapon was actually wrestled free from the terrorist by a hero, a member of the public, a local greengrocer, just running between a couple of parked cars, just managed to get that shotgun off him, point it back at the attacker. The attacker then sort of stumbles off, and actually the greengrocer there, having put the shotgun down, then goes after that attacker to throw a stone at him, just to try and make sure that he gets out of the way and nowhere near that weapon again. And that terrorist at that point went back onto the bridge to join his terrorist counterpart back on the bridge, continuing to fire down towards those members of the public that were at this Festival of Lights ceremony. And it was effectively then a shootout between those two terrorists and members of New South Wales Police, with eventually some minutes later the police managing to take out the first that first individual that you saw having the weapon wrestled from him, and then the second individual was shot by police as well. We can tell you who that second terrorist was. He was a 24-year-old by the name of Naveed Akram. He was a Pakistani national originally from Lahore, appears to have come to Australia at some point. We don't know exactly what his immigration status was, but there was a picture, his driving license, that was recovered nearby, and that's helped the police identify him. There's a picture, a still image of him on that bridge that they used as their sort of area to target the members of the public from as well. We can clearly see it's the same man. This individual lived, according to his driving license, at an address in the Bonnyrigg suburb of Sydney, and that home address now is the scene of intense police activity. An armed police unit moved into a house there a little earlier. Forensic teams now going through that address looking for any clues, because what is one of the most urgent things for investigators to establish is whether anyone else had oversight of this, whether people knew what was happening. Of course, if they knew and didn't tell, that's a criminal offence in itself. But aside from that, are there other people out there that may be planning something similar? Police need to answer that question as soon as possible so that they can reassure the people of Sydney that actually the threat, there is no wider threat at this time. And some terrible and sad news to bring amidst this tragedy as well, with one of the 11 innocent people that were shot dead having been identified. A British-born rabbi, Rabbi Eli Schlanger, who was 41 years of age. He was a father of 5 young children, the youngest born just a couple of months ago, a young boy. He leaves behind those 5 young children and his wife. Rabbi Schlanger was born in the northwest of London and moved with his family to New York as a child. Later he moved to Australia and married an Australian woman. Interestingly, we found out that Rabbi Schlanger had spoken to Australian media after that horrific terrorist attack at the Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester in October of this year. He told Australian television, and this is a bizarre coincidence, that his great uncle Leslie had been the rabbi at the Heaton Park Synagogue for more than 35 years. He was asked by an Australian reporter whether he was worried about a similar attack happening in Australia. The rabbi replied that he put his full trust in Hashem, that nothing will happen. But then, of course, sadly, the news that he is one of the confirmed victims, the 11 innocent victims, and the authorities in Sydney preparing members of the public there for the likelihood that the death toll, as I say, it's 11 innocent members of the public, 1 terrorist, but that death toll likely to rise in the hours ahead.
All right, Mark White, thank you very much for that. And just to confirm that Rabbi Eli Schlanger, a British-born rabbi, was killed in the Bondi Beach attack. His family has confirmed he was a 41-year-old father of 5 his most recent child, a son, born in October. Very, very, very sad news. Well, joining me now is my former panellist, Andy Williams, and also the former Australian MP, Timothy Smith. He's also the advisor to the Deputy Foreign Minister, Sharon Haskell. Now, I'm going to start with you, Tim, because we are now here of a British-born rabbi being killed, but you spoke of a friend who was also shot.
So this attack's got global ramifications, and my thoughts and prayers are with the family of the rabbi who was murdered in this attack. My friend Arsen Ostrowski, who's an Israeli-Australian, he has appeared on GBNews many times. He's a human rights lawyer. He only moved back to Australia a few weeks ago to head a Jewish organisation in Australia to combat anti-Semitism.
Wow. And,
he's moved back to Australia from Israel. He's gone to Bondi with his children and for Hanukkah, and he's been shot in the head. Now, thankfully, he survived. He's tweeted that the bullet grazed the side of his head, and it's a miracle that he's not dead. So I was very worried about him this morning because I was WhatsApping him, and I'd heard on the grapevine that he'd been injured. As it turned out, he was a survivor. But, this is just unbelievable that when you know that some of your close friends have almost been killed, going to a park in Sydney with their kids for the holidays, it's quite, it does shock you. I mean, it doesn't shock me in the sense that I always thought something terrible could have happened in Australia, particularly after the synagogue in Melbourne was firebombed last year. But when it happens, it's still a shock, particularly when a close friend of yours is injured, almost dead. Well, not almost dead, but could have been killed.
Well, to be fair, excuse me, a bullet grazing your head is an almost.
Yeah.
I think you're right to say that, but I suppose when you hear these stories, it's always sort of somebody else, so you're not connected to it. But
No.
here, you hear of them, you think that's terrible, how awful, but then when it's somebody who you know and personally, yeah.
And so he lives through October 7, he lives in the Middle East, and he goes back to, of all places, Australia, and gets shot in a terror attack at Bondi Beach. I mean, if anything says that Australia has a problem, that story does. And hopefully the Australian government finally does something, because it's been warned for 2 years that anti-Semitism has grown out of control since October 7, and the language from the Australian government has been all wrong. It's essentially been anti-Israel the whole time, and that's emboldened the anti-Israeli mob. And that's what's happened today. Language leads to actions. And that's why we have hate crimes, by the way, because all the evidence has taught us for 100 years that if you allow something to fester, and it always starts with words, this is where it ends. Now, I'm very much a free speech guy, but there has to be ramifications for standing on the steps of the Opera House shouting "Gas the Jews" 2 days after October 7, the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, and nothing happened.
Well, I mean, I say freedom of speech, but words have consequences. So if you do say things like that, there should be a consequence.
Yeah, and I've said on this show before that, absolutely freedom of speech, but if you say something in public, on any public platform, whether that's social media, whether that's on the steps of Sydney Opera House, on this show, you have a responsibility to use your language judiciously and thoughtfully, and you should know that people might take it, particularly the sort of sick people who would do something like this, might take it as a good reason to go out and commit some horrific atrocity. I think what you just said, Tim, is a neat encapsulation, actually, of how many Jewish people feel that they're under attack all over the world. Because it's almost a metaphor, the idea that you'd be in Israel on October 7th, you then go to move back to Sydney, and you're there on Bondi when this happens. It's like nowhere is safe. And I think that is how many Jewish people will be feeling right now.
Well, I think they've got every right to believe that they're safer in Tel Aviv than they are in Sydney at the moment. Well, let's be very clear about this. That would not have happened in Tel Aviv. It would not have. I've lived there. I can guarantee you. If someone pulls a gun or a knife in Tel Aviv in a hostile fashion, they don't last very long. The police, the Israeli soldiers who are on reserve duty or have the weekend off, they're carrying their firearm. I mean, Israel's a fascinating country like this. Its gun ownership, they're all armed. But they don't have gun crime like America because they're all trained. They're all trained properly. Obviously, military service, the idea of everyone has to do it. Well, not everyone, and that's a huge debate in Israel at the moment, but we won't get sidetracked. But the vast majority of Israelis are trained to handle a firearm. A lot of them continue to have a firearm throughout their life, and particularly after October 7, you see Israelis carrying firearms to the supermarket, to a restaurant, walking down the street. And I'm not advocating for that sort of policy settings in the UK or Australia, but if someone does something like what we saw in Bondi, in Tel Aviv, they don't last very long.
One thing I found remarkable about that clip that's been already become kind of an iconic clip today that's been doing the rounds of a member of the public basically intervening, taking the gun off one of the shooters, is that that's quite a long clip, and if you look at it, there's no police anywhere to be seen. So he is left as a member of the public to basically apprehend terrorists single-handedly.
No, I'm always I'm not going to criticise New South Wales police because there'll be no doubt there'll be an investigation into what's gone on here, and as I understand it, there are 2 police officers who have been injured.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But it did strike me that the terrorists were, I've seen this incredible vision that we've got of this terror attack that's circulating on social media. Some of it's quite horrific. And these guys are shooting seemingly without any consequences for about 10 minutes, except for this one hero. And Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has called out this hero and thanked him for what he did. And I think, and this is a really important point, I think this hero is a Muslim.
Yeah, well, that's what they're saying.
And I don't know that he has a Muslim-sounding name, but we don't. So I don't want to. It's very easy to draw conclusions.
Well,
it would appear that
it
would appear that he is. Bibi Netanyahu said he was.
Yeah.
Well, this bloke's a hero, and he deserves an award because what he did, that takes real guts.
Well, he was simply protecting people, irrespective of creed, colour, race, ethnicity, all those things, from somebody who was firing indiscriminately, killing people indiscriminately on a beach when these people were celebrating one of the most wonderful festivals on the Jewish calendar, Hanukkah, which it is shocking. And
just on Bibi, Nana, it's interesting. Bibi wrote a letter to the Australian Prime Minister 4 months ago where he specifically said to Anthony Albanese, if you don't... this is after Australia decided to recognise Palestine, along with the British and the Canadians. And he said that if you don't do something about this, there will be a tragedy in Australia. And he was right.
Yeah. Sadly, he was. We'll stay with us. Still to come, has immigration fuelled anti-Semitism? GBNews' presenter Josh Howie will join me in the studio next to discuss.
Decisions made in Washington aren't just shaping America, they're shaping Britain too. From migration to global security, from crime to health. Whatever happens in the White House today
will be felt in your town or city tomorrow.
That's why The Late Show is live from Washington, D.C.
Cutting through the politics to show you what it all means for Britain.
The Late Show live every night at midnight.
Only on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
I think it's just good, honest, humble food. And yeah, as people get away from the ultra-processed stuff and get back to their roots, and what's better than a good jacket potato?
Do you know what? Sales of jacket spuds have gone through the roof. The big potatoes at Waitrose. There's been a 178% increase in people looking at recipes. And I just think it's wholesome, it's affordable, it's comfortable, it makes you feel good, it's back to basics. That, I think, at the moment, sums up the nation.
I think very much it being affordable as well, with the climate we're living in at the moment, it definitely helps knowing, you're putting food on the table for a reasonable price, and people appreciate that. And it's good, honest food. You can feed your kids, and kids are seeing it on social media, and they're getting excited about it as well. So they're not like, you know, obviously everyone sees all the big brands, and now there's all these, you know, jacket potato people out there, and we're giving them something that's healthy, and they want to eat it. And I think the parents appreciate that.
And Ben, I've seen your videos. They queue around the block to get to you. If people are in the mood to cook a potato tonight, of course, we don't want to affect your sales. What is your sort of top of the pop spud recipe? Give it to us.
Oh, it's all about variety. It's picking the right potato is really important. Get a nice melody or a cara or culture or something like that. Nice and big. In the oven, if you can. Hour and 20. Get a nice crispy skin on there. Loads of butter, loads of cheese, and a nice curry on top or something. That's my go-to.
Ooh. Now that was a final little curveball they threw at the last minute there, Ben.
GBNews, the People's Channel.
Bold. They are under no illusion. Ray, are you a human trafficker? Boundless. I've had enough of the nonsense, and I'm not afraid to say it.
Don't get this on the BBC.
Every weeknight, I tear through the headlines.
The smell of gasoline. Should we be worried about it?
From Westminster madness to cultural war chaos.
What I'm going to do now, they are throwing things out the cars.
Get ready, Britain. Here we go. Patrick Christie's tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, welcome to GB News. I'm Nana Akua. 24 minutes after 6 o'clock. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Well, let me bring you up to date on the devastating attack at Bondi Beach. Moments ago, President Trump made the following statement on the attack.
It was a rough day, but to Australia and the Prime Minister, to everybody that we know so well, we get along with so well, we have a great relationship. That's a terrible situation going on over there. Think of that.
We now know that at least 12 people have been killed following a mass shooting by 2 gunmen at Bondi Beach in Sydney, with 29 currently in hospital. One of the dead is the British-born rabbi. In a press conference, the New South Wales Police Premier Chris Minns said that one of the gunmen had been killed and another was in custody. Australian police say they are currently investigating if there is a third offender. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says the evil that was unleashed at Bondi Beach today is beyond comprehension.
This afternoon, there has been a devastating terrorist incident at Bondi at the Hanukkah by the Sea celebration. This is a targeted attack on Jewish Australians on the first day of Hanukkah, which should be a day of joy, a celebration of faith. An act of evil anti-Semitism, terrorism, that has struck the heart of our nation. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian, and every Australian tonight will be, like me, devastated.
More than 50 gunshots were heard as hundreds of people fled the scene in Sydney at around about 6:40 p.m. local time.
Ran onto the beach. I guess everyone ran onto the beach. It was pretty terrifying. And yeah, I eventually went back to see what was happening. A few people helped. We sort of helped a few old people get up and get out of there, but it was like there were lots of bodies on the floor.
There's been plenty of reaction here in the UK, with the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, saying it is deeply distressing news and described it as an appalling attack. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has announced that extra officers from the Metropolitan Police will be on the streets of London following the attack. And Reform UK leader Nigel Farage had this to say.
Genuinely horrendous. Last I hear, it's 10 dead and many, many wounded. I did see some video of an heroic Australian, taking the gun out of the hands of one of these terrorists. Desperately sorry for the Jewish community in Sydney, which is quite considerable. But equally, you realise actually the threat to the Jewish people is everywhere. It's not just in Manchester or in parts of North London, it's all over the world. And there is this real poison.
Well, joining me now is the former Australian MP Timothy Smith, political commentator Andy Williams and GBNews presenter Josh Howie. Josh, I'm going to start with you. Is Nigel right? He said the threat to Jewish people is all over the world.
Well, we've seen it. We've seen Jews in Manchester just a few months ago being murdered. We see it now in Australia. We've seen it in America. This is what globalised the Intifada looks like. It's happened. It's happening.
Do you feel safe?
No. No. I mean, there's always been an undercurrent, but it's obviously escalated over the last couple of years. And I think there's the frustration when you have the Australian Prime Minister talking about how it's unbelievable. It's like, no, this is the maddening thing is that Jews have been shouting for years now that this rhetoric matched with an ideology, this was always going to be an inevitable outcome. So now we're seeing it, and it's terrifying, and it's incredibly frustrating.
Well, a lot of people are blaming Anthony Albanese, because you've mentioned, but he, of course, recognised Palestine as a state, as did Sir Keir Starmer, as did the Canadians. Do you hold him to account as well for this?
I think that you can point fingers really everywhere at this, but certainly that's not going to help things, is it? I mean, the argument went at the time that this is rewarding terrorism. And there's absolutely, hopefully one day there can be a sovereign, peaceful, prosperous Palestinian state. That is not today. And for the people you just mentioned, including our own Prime Minister, to jump the gun on that gave a red light to terrorists, that this is what these people are today, racist terrorists, that their hate and the murder of Jews will be rewarded. Well, guess what? That's exactly what happened today.
And I've been talking about the normalising of anti-Semitism, because it does feel that you can say things about Jewish people, that's OK, but say something about black people, about Muslims, about other people, people who are gay, anything like that, there will be consequences. But it feels as though for Jewish people, if you say stuff about Jewish people, like mobilise the Intifada from the river to the sea, there's either an excuse or some sort of justification as to why your behaviour towards them is acceptable.
Absolutely, because part of this hate, a good chunk of it, is coming from the left, who are supposedly anti-racist, yet when they go out on marches in the hundreds of thousands talking about globalising the Intifada, this is exactly... They can pretend to themselves that this isn't what they mean, but this, of course, is the actual result of globalising the Intifada. So, again, you're going to come down to the hypocrisy there of these supposed anti-racists allying themselves with incredible, hateful bigots.
It does feel that way. Now, earlier, Tim, you talked about your friend who was shot. We hear that he's OK now.
Yeah, so Arsen Ostrowski, the human rights lawyer, an Australian Israeli, only recently moved back to Australia from Israel. And the irony being, lived through October 7, lived in the Middle East for 13 years, moves back to Australia with his family and gets shot in the head at Bondi, celebrating the first night of Hanukkah with his wife and kids. It's extraordinary. But it's kind of not at the same time, because all of us were saying post-October 7, with a 700% rise in anti-Semitism, the firebombing of a synagogue in Melbourne, with 13 major anti-Semitic events in New South Wales, that a mass casualty terrorist attack was only around the corner, particularly after the Australian government rewarded terrorism by recognising a Palestinian state before all the hostages were released. That is morally indefensible. And I say this to the three democratic governments who did that, the Canadians, the British and the Australians: what on earth were you thinking? This is the result. You know, I'm very much someone for individuals taking responsibility for their own actions, so I'm not blaming the Australian government for these terrorists shooting 40 innocent people, killing 12 of them. But at the end of the day, the Australian government and other governments have to take responsibility for sending all the wrong signals to a group of people that already hate Jews.
But by that very argument, and people might justify this particular attack, and there is no justification, in my view. But they might then say, but if they are using past events as a justification, somebody might point to Gaza and say, but you've 40,000 or 60,000 or how many thousands of people being killed in the war, and many of those were children.
And Nana, seriously, I'm not going to speculate as to whether these people were born in Australia, first generation, or whatever. But if they are migrants to Australia, and Australia has provided them with a far higher standard of living than they otherwise would have had they come from, say, the Middle East, and this is the repayment to Australia, which is killing 12 innocent people, going about their innocent business in Bondi Beach, then the consequences for social cohesion in Australia will be dire.
Well, my point is that, people use these past events as justification for their behaviour. But we do have a picture of your friend. Just to warn you, it'll be on the screen, but this image could be quite distressing for some people. But this is your friend, Tim.
That is Arsene Ostrowski. He's a great man, a legend, a great mate of mine. And that's him giving an interview to Australian television after a bullet grazed his head. He's a hero. And I was very worried about him this morning because as you can see when people are on WhatsApp, he hadn't been on WhatsApp for quite some time. So for a while this morning I was thinking the worst. But thankfully he managed to survive.
Wow,
but at least 12 others at the moment weren't so lucky.
Yeah.
And, I'm hearing some terrible stories of, an elderly couple with the husband jumping in front of a bullet to save the wife, and all these horrific stories of these innocent people lighting the first candle of Hanukkah are being shot by people who wanted to kill them simply because they were Jewish. And I said to you before, Nana, how many times over the last 2 years have we sat here and discussed the fact that scores of Jewish people are being killed yet again simply because of Judaism, because of their Jewish faith? It is unacceptable. It must be called out. And I make this point. History has taught us that those who come for the Jewish people inevitably come for all of us who believe in freedom. And if we allow this to continue, then the basic liberties and freedoms of the West will evaporate. This must stop, and we must do something about it.
Thank you very much for that, Timothy. Josh Howie, you have Free Speech Nation coming up in about 25 minutes. What can we expect on the programme?
We have got different reactions from Australia and from the British Jewish community. We've got Gideon Foster, who runs Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, to talk about what we can do in this country, exactly to mirror what Timothy was saying there, because the reality is it doesn't stop at the Jews. It doesn't stop with the Jews at all. And we need to take actions not just to protect the British Jewish community, but to protect our society. So at the same time, the dilemma is always going to be when it comes to free speech is where is that line crossed? And we don't want to lose our society as we try and save it. And I guess that's what the next few hours is going to be trying to grapple with. How do we deal with the hate whilst still allowing ourselves the freedoms that we so much enjoy and which define the West?
All right, Josh Howie, we should look forward to that show. Josh will be back on your screens in about 25 minutes' time. Thank you very much to the former Australian MP, Timothy Smith. And I think my political commentator, Andy Williams, he may be forced to stay for a little bit longer. Right, well, stay with us. Loads more to come. We'll bring you more on that breaking news. Of course, the attack in Bondi Beach in Australia last night. I'm Nana Akua. This is GBNews. Still to come, I'll be asking you, has multiculturalism created greater intolerance?
Hello there, good evening. This is your GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. The wet conditions we've seen across northwestern areas of the UK this weekend will be pushing their way a touch further southeastwards as we head into the new week. It's this trailing weather front that's been providing the unsettled conditions with repeated pulses and outbreaks of quite heavy rainfall, and there are several rain warnings still in force as we head throughout the night, with those heavy outbreaks still likely to providing some disruption and flooding at times. Generally the far southeast staying dry during tonight, but it is going to stay rather cloudy, and underneath that cloud fairly mild. Overnight lows of only 9 or 10 Celsius, but a touch cooler to start off the day for Scotland and Northern Ireland, where we see that rain eventually clearing its way through, but temperatures here likely dropping into low single figures, maybe even closer towards freezing in some very sheltered rural spots. There will be a few showers just to watch out for across the far northwest, but generally it's a much better day to come for Northern Ireland and Scotland, those outbreaks of perhaps hazy sunshine poking their way through. But we do have amber rain warnings in force throughout Monday for Cumbria, but also parts of southern Wales, where that rain could still linger for a time, waving in places, so it could push its way back up into parts of Cumbria later on in the day. So again, with the saturated ground that we've got around of late, further flooding and disruption is possible, so take care when you are travelling. Again, the far southeast managing to stay dry throughout the day tomorrow, but again rather breezy and cloudy. Temperatures here 11-12 degrees Celsius, but that fresher air into the northwest, seeing temperatures here around 8 degrees Celsius. Our front will slowly push its way southeastwards into Tuesday. I wouldn't take these graphics too literally. There's just some uncertainty in regards to exactly how quickly it could break up or clear, do cater potentially for some heavy pulses of rain during the day across the southeast on Tuesday. But we've got more wet and windy weather arriving into the northwest as we head later on into next week. So do stay tuned to the forecast. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
no,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GBNews, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Welcome back. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. If you've just tuned in, I know you're thinking, she's still there. Yes, I'm still here because I'm here to bring you up to date with the devastating attack at Bondi Beach. Moments ago, President Trump made the following statement on the attack.
It was a rough day, but to Australia and the Prime Minister, to everybody that we know so well, we get along with so well, we have a great relationship. That's a terrible situation going on over there. Think of that.
Well, we now know that 12 people have been killed following the mass shooting by 2 gunmen at the beach, Bondi Beach in Sydney, with 29 who are currently in hospital. One of the dead is a British-born rabbi. And in a press conference, the New South Wales Police Premier, Chris Minns, said that one of the gunmen had been killed and another was in custody. Australian police say they are currently investigating if there is a third offender. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says that the evil that was unleashed at Bondi Beach today is beyond comprehension.
This afternoon, there has been a devastating terrorist incident at Bondi at the Hanukkah by the Sea celebration. This is a targeted attack on Jewish Australians on the first day of Hanukkah, which should be a day of joy, a celebration of faith. An act of evil anti-Semitism, terrorism, that has struck the heart of our nation. An attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on every Australian, and every Australian tonight will be, like me, devastated.
More than 50 gunshots were heard as hundreds of people fled the scene in Sydney at around about 6:40 p.m. local time.
Ran onto the beach. I guess everyone ran onto the beach. It was pretty terrifying. And yeah, I eventually went back to see what was happening. A few people helped a few old people get up and get out of there, but it was like there were lots of bodies on the floor.
There's been plenty of reaction here in the UK, with the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, saying it is deeply distressing news, and he described it as an appalling attack. London Mayor Sadiq Khan has announced that extra officers from the Metropolitan Police will be on the streets of London. And Reform UK leader Nigel Farage had this to say.
Genuinely horrendous. Last I hear, it's 10 dead and many, many wounded. I did see some video of an heroic Australian, taking the gun out of the hands of one of these terrorists. Desperately sorry for the Jewish community in Sydney, which is quite considerable. But equally, you realise actually the threat to the Jewish people is everywhere. It's not just in Manchester or in parts of North London, it's all over the world. And there is this real poison.
Well, joining me now is Charles Small. Now, he's the founder and director of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. So, Charles, so let's talk about it, because I hear a lot of people talking about globalise the intifada. You hear of people, I don't know whether they're going down a rabbit hole, saying that there is, I think it's the Muslim Brotherhood who've been saying we're going to flood the UK or flood countries with Muslims and change the ideology. This is a radical Islam. Talk to me about that. Is that something that's happening?
Right. So I think for your viewers, the Muslim Brotherhood, it sounds like a fraternity organization, but the Muslim Brotherhood started about 100 years ago in Egypt. And it's a fusion of the great religion of Islam, a very narrow interpretation of Islam, with European anti-Semitism and even Nazism, and they fused it together. It's the root of all radical political jihadist Islam. And when the Hamas, which is the Palestinian chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood, they speak about globalizing the Intifada, in the streets of Paris, in the streets of London and Manchester, people for the last 2 years have been echoing the words of the Muslim Brotherhood, or the Palestinian chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood, speaking about globalizing the Intifada. And what they're doing, what we saw today, is the globalization of the Intifada. It's the violent, anti-democratic, sexist, homophobic, anti-Western ideology that's seeping into Australia, Canada, and Britain. The British establishment took the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, Yusuf Qaradawi, into the United Kingdom 40 years ago. Mr. Corbyn, Mr. Galloway, Mr. Livingston brought him into the British establishment. Yusuf Qaradawi always preached his entire life that the true believer is obligated to complete the work of Hitler. This is the gentleman that helped to start Islamic studies at Oxford University. They have infiltrated the British establishment. They're here. London has become a banking center of money laundering for the Muslim Brotherhood, for their global intifada. And we're not immune for it. They're focusing on the Jews in Israel, but this is a threat to British society, Australian society, Canadian society, and democratic societies around the world.
But do you have actual evidence of that? Because some people, I hear that, I've heard about the Muslim Brotherhood, I've heard about people talking about it, but some might argue that that sounds like you've gone down a rabbit hole.
Right. So just 3 weeks ago, ISGAP published a very important study, and we launched it in Washington, on the entryism of the Muslim Brotherhood into Western society and into the United States and Britain. 40 years ago, the Muslim Brotherhood, and this is their strategic goals, was to try to distance Israel away from Western democratic countries, to alienate, isolate, demonize Israel, Zionism, and the Jewish people, to weaken, to destroy it, to murder Jews around the world. And this is very important for your listeners, to use anti-Semitism as a way to fragment and weaken and divide Western democratic society. So to start with Israel, the little Satan, and to end the struggle against democracy, the great Satan, the United States, Britain, and other democratic countries. So anti-Semitism, in the words of Professor Elie Wiesel, always begins with the Jews, but it never, ever ends with the Jews. History teaches us that if we allow anti-Semitism to flourish, yes, Jews will be injured, as we saw today, but democracy, democratic principles, the values that we live with in a democracy are also going to be weakened and destroyed. So we have to.
But are they really that organised? Because this sounds like a really organised structure where there's centres of command and control, but they're not, are they? These are probably people who just read stuff. I don't know the details, but these are probably 3 people who are part of a cell, their own little individual cell, that they've read some stuff, they feel they're part of something, and they're just attacking a festival. That's what I suspect. I don't know the details.
Right.
But my point is, are they really that organised? Is it really that calculated?
Right.
Or are they just a load of people who just got together and just decided to do something heinous?
So it could be both. Sometimes there's lone wolves who operate. They may be lone wolves, although the military training that they look like they have will know in the next few days who these people were and who was behind it. But I think what's also very important to understand is that Qatar, which has a bay'ah, a spiritual oath to the Muslim Brotherhood. They represent the interests of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and they're funding Al Jazeera, the media of record, British universities, American universities.
But you have actual evidence of that, is it?
Yes.
Or you're not just stating that?
No, we're a serious scholarly organization, and we've come out with 15 reports since October the 7th. We found, for instance, over $100 billion in undocumented money going to American universities. This is a very systematic, organized movement that is fragmenting our society.
All right, Charles Smith, it's really sad that I have to leave it there. It's fascinating listening. He's the founder and director of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. Well, coming up next, I'll be speaking to Israel's international spokesperson to the United States, Jonathan Harunoff. This is Nana Queer. This is GB News.
Britain deserves a newsroom that puts the facts and your voice first.
Well, and that's what you get on GB News. Lively debates, lively conversation.
And we're not afraid to hold power to account.
And each other. So join me, Andrew Pierce.
And me, Miriam Gates, for Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 on GB News.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christie's Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions, but every Friday night at 9 p.m. you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christie's Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
Because
the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes and Kerr weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
So he can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Dordme, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
At GB News, we love to hear from you, our loyal community. So drop us a line at gbnews.com/yoursay. There, you can talk to each other and also to the presenters live on air. gbnews.com/yoursay, because GB News is your channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua on GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, just to bring you up to date on the devastating attack at Bondi Beach. Moments ago, President Trump spoke about the incident and about the attack. Now, at least 12 people have been killed following a mass shooting. 2 gunmen are suspected to be those who perpetrated it at Bondi Beach in Sydney, with 29 currently in hospital. One of the dead we now know is British-born rabbi. In a press conference, the spokesperson said that this was an awful incident. We're joined now by Israel's international spokesperson to the United Nations, Jonathan Harunoff. Jonathan, this is horrendous. What are your thoughts?
Thanks for having me on your show. It is horrendous, absolutely. What we saw today is...
I was going to say, I was reading that script and then somebody just took it.
Another October 7th take place at Bondi Beach earlier today on the first night of Hanukkah. And this is essentially what globalizing the Intifada looks like, literally, without any metaphor, in real life. Jewish families gathering, not for political reasons, not for activist reasons, simply to celebrate this Jewish festival, and they're gunned down simply for being Jewish. And we've seen a very disturbing trend over the past couple years of Jewish festivals being essentially breeding grounds for terrorism, vile anti-Semitism. We saw on October the 7th, Simchat Torah, one of the happiest, holiest days of the Jewish calendar, Hamas terrorists storm Israel's southern border and massacre 1,200 people. A couple months back on Yom Kippur, another very holy day, we saw that horrific terrorist attack at Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester. And today, Hanukkah, another day, a day when people, Jewish communities, come out of the synagogues, come away from, their protected boundaries into the open to celebrate light. We see another horrific terror attack, and it's absolutely reprehensible and appalling.
It is appalling, Jonathan. It's really good to talk to you. Thank you so much. I've got to say a huge thank you to you who've joined me. Next up, Free Speech Nation. Let's get some weather.
Warm and cosy, with a chance of zero visibility. Boxed Boiler sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. This is your GB News weather update provided by the Met Office. The wet conditions we've seen across northwestern areas of the UK this weekend will be pushing their way a touch further southeastwards as we head into the new week. It's this trailing weather front that's been providing the unsettled conditions with repeated pulses and outbreaks of quite heavy rainfall, and there are several rain warnings still in force as we head throughout the night, with those heavy outbreaks still likely to providing some disruption and flooding at times. Generally, the far southeast staying dry during tonight, but it is going to stay rather cloudy, and underneath that cloud fairly mild. Overnight lows of only 9 or 10 Celsius, but a touch cooler to start off the day for Scotland and Northern Ireland, where we see that rain eventually clearing its way through, but temperatures here likely dropping into low single figures, maybe even closer towards freezing in some very sheltered rural spots. There will be a few showers just to watch out for across the far northwest, but generally it's a much better day to come for Northern Ireland and Scotland. Those outbreaks of perhaps hazy sunshine poking their way through. But we do have amber rain warnings in force throughout Monday for Cumbria, but also parts of southern Wales, where that rain could still linger for a time, waving in places, so it could push its way back up into parts of Cumbria later on in the day. So again, with the saturated ground that we've got around of late, further flooding and disruption is possible, so take care when you are travelling. Again, the far southeast managing to stay dry throughout the day tomorrow, but again, rather breezy and cloudy. Temperatures here 11-12 degrees Celsius, but that fresher air into the northwest, seeing temperatures here around 8 degrees Celsius. Our front will slowly push its way southeastwards into Tuesday. I wouldn't take these graphics too literally. There's just some uncertainty in regards to exactly how quickly it could break up or clear. Do cater potentially for some heavy pulses of rain during the day across the southeast on Tuesday. But we've got more wet and windy weather arriving into the northwest as we head later on into next week. So do stay tuned to the forecast. Bye-bye.
Warm and cosy, with a chance of zero visibility. Boxed Boiler sponsors the weather on GB News.
It's the big one. Your chance to win a whopping £85,000 in tax-free cash. The largest cash prize we've given away to date. That's like over £7,000 a month extra in your bank account each month for 12 whole months. That's a year of yes. Yes to holidays, yes to treats, yes to shopping trips, yes to home improvements. For another chance to win £85,000 cash, text cash to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB18 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 30th of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
no,
isn't it?
No,
Because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes and Kerr weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel,